A blonde young man tells Riku that he has no use for a defective product who only knows how to use barrier magic. He then kicks the boy out of the group in the middle of that empty wasteland without any pity. The blue-haired mage is in complete shock, having been kicked out of nowhere while they were heading back to the city after clearing a dungeon. Completely confused, the boy tries to process what he just heard, unable to believe his ears. The team leader insists that the boy is useless to the group and tells him to get out of there right away. Desperate, the caster asks for a reason, wanting to know why he is being tossed aside like that. The blonde explains that tomorrow they will enter a very difficult place, and having him around would completely ruin the team's progress. With an intimidating look, he asks if the young man knows the real reason, revealing that his name is Ochiburo. This serious-looking guy is none other than the crown prince of that country, who also holds the rare hero class. The title was meant for defeating the Demon King, but since the great villain has already been beaten, it has just become a fancy name. We then see the great capital of that massive kingdom, highlighting its majestic castles and ancient buildings. The current king of the land is sending his son to clear out dungeons to build a good reputation and become the next ruler. As a court guard, the boy was supposed to protect the heir, but the noble quickly throws it in his face that he is just a huge dead weight. The outcast lowers his head in sadness, remembering that defective mage is the mean nickname everyone back home gave him. All of this is because, ever since he was born, the only ability he has ever been able to cast is creating shields. The arrogant leader brags about how strong he has become, stating he no longer needs protection from such a weak kid. With a big, confident smile, he recalls how he defeated all the monsters during their last run using just a single strike. The swordsman is seen in the middle of battle slicing through everything in his path, bragging as he asks if he even took a single hit in return. Fully aware of his own weakness, the boy clenches his fists in anger and agrees with his head down that the leader didn't take any damage. Drawing his weapon, the prince claims that for someone as skilled as him, something as basic as a barrier is completely useless. The mage admits that he only knows how to create defenses, but he tries to argue that he isn't a burden until he gets cut off by a loud yell from the prince. The blonde noble throws it in the boy's face that this is the only talent he has and refuses to listen to any more excuses. Even though he agrees, the caster tries to explain how his magic works, only to get scolded again and told to stop making excuses. Startled by the yelling, the blue-haired boy widens his eyes, while the leader rants right in front of him. Keeping his respect, the commoner explains that during their camps, the monsters never come close thanks to his protection. He adds that he placed shields on everyone's bodies, but the swordsman thinks that is the most ridiculous thing ever. The heir mocks him, saying that this magic is just a basic dome shield that anyone with a tiny bit of mana could use. Desperate, the outcast tries to show that his ability is actually very versatile and that he only wanted to support the team in his own way. The group leader swears he has never heard of a defense placed on the body, let alone felt any kind of support helping him out. Looking at him with disgust, the rich kid reminds him that his talent was recognized despite being a commoner, which got him into the Royal Academy. Being a genius, he got the highest grades in history and became the youngest court mage among the 12 chosen by the kingdom. However, the blonde claims that when it came time to prove his worth in practice, the kid turned out to be nothing but a huge defective product. Saddened by the insult, the guard replies that he cast the magic for the leader's safety, fearing that something bad might happen. Full of arrogance, the hero replies that the young man just applied completely unnecessary powers on them the whole time. To make matters even worse, the swordsman questions whether the boy was actually casting anything at all during their missions. Confused, the rejected boy doesn't understand where the conversation is going and asks what the guy means by those mean words. Shouting, the group leader reminds him that the shields created by the boy's magic are completely invisible to the naked eye. Looking down, the mage agrees, because as the noble said, these defenses cannot be seen by people with low magical aptitude. With a smirk, The prince assumes the commoner was just lying about his spells so he could get carried by the team. The snobby prince clenches his fist in disgust and accuses his former teammate of being blinded by the reward money they earned. The mage lowers his head and agrees that the blonde's accusation is actually true. He then explains to the leader that his only reason for joining the group was exactly to make some good money. The blue-haired youth reveals that he chose the royal service because the court salary was very high and super stable. With a smirk, the hare claims he already knew that, accusing the guard of being greedy trash, trying to get paid without putting in the work. Clenching his fists, the commoner tries to defend himself, claiming he really needed that money to take care of his poor family. At that, the blonde mocks him, reminding him that he is just an orphan and therefore has no relatives to support. With a somewhat sad look, the guard lowers his head and confirms that he really did grow up without his parents around. His sad past shows that he was raised in a very poor orphanage, located on the outskirts of the great capital. Desperate, the boy explains that all that cash was meant for making ongoing donations to the place that took good care of him. At that moment, he looks over and notices that the other team members are also judging him with total disgust and contempt. Completely shocked, the caster painfully realizes that no one in that fancy group is on his side. One of the adventurers angrily comments that lying to steal coins from their own country is the lowest thing someone could do. Meanwhile, the big bald warrior accuses the boy of getting his high royal rank just by using bribes and connections. Then, the other helper sighs, finding it completely absurd that there is a royal mage who only knows how to make simple magic walls. The outcast listens to all those harsh accusations in total silence, feeling the immense pain of being judged in such a humiliating way. Amused by the scene, the noble prince gives a wide, wicked smile and tells the young man that he isn't just kicked out of the group. Pointing his finger right in the poor boy's face, the bossy leader firmly decrees that the commoner is banished from the entire country. Startled, the boy goes into full panic mode, wanting to understand the real reason for receiving such a severe punishment out of nowhere. Looking serious, the proud swordsman justifies the decision, saying that the former ally didn't just steal common coins, but the very taxes of the people. He finishes the humiliation by stating that a useless liar who fakes his abilities has absolutely no right to live there. The blonde warns him that his grace period is only 10 days starting from today. Turning his back, the leader claims he is being very generous by letting him go instead of facing the ultimate penalty for an illegal stay. Without looking back, the snob tells his former teammate to pack his bags and leave the kingdom as fast as possible. Completely speechless, the boy stands there with his mouth open, watching his old companions walk away without the slightest bit of pity. Just then, a heavy rain starts to fall, and the young man finally processes what he just heard, leaving him in shock. Standing alone on the cliff, he wonders if this is all a bad dream, because being banished from his own nation out of nowhere seems like madness. Despair takes over the mage as he breaks into a cold sweat and pants, realizing how serious this terrible situation really is. He remembers that the orphanage where he grew up is in that country, and if he leaves, he will never see his beloved family again. The image of the kind caretaker, who always showed him love, comes to mind, making him even more distressed about all of this. Thinking about the poor kids there, the boy squeezes his eyes shut and decides he can't let things end like this. With that, he decides to take action, telling himself that he needs to clear up this huge misunderstanding no matter what. An idea pops into his head as he remembers the majestic king who rules those lands. The plan was to ask the ruler to talk to the prince, but suddenly, a massive danger comes tearing through the air. Suddenly, a giant, spiky tail swipes right past the boy, showing that he isn't alone out there. A monstrous beast appears, roaring fiercely right in front of the mage, ready to make a meal out of him. The beast lunges forward with its giant mouth wide open to strike, but the young man simply says that he is in a big hurry right now. Showing no fear, he makes a hand seal to activate his magical power while the heavy rain keeps pouring down. A glowing square barrier appears, trapping the giant monster's snout. making a crash into the defense, unable to move forward. Holding his pose, the blue-haired warrior starts casting a variation of his technique, called transformation. Then he points his glowing fingers at the beast, revealing attack form number 5 of his powerful magic. Continuing his attack, a strong pillar of energy falls from the sky, crushing the target. The huge monster widens its yellow eyes, feeling the pain of the massive impact. Stripped of its strength, the creature collapses to the ground, kicking up a lot of dust as its snout hits the floor. Noticing that the beast is still breathing, the mage decides to use the second form of his power. With that, he summons glowing blades, easily taking down the gigantic beast for good. Seeing his enemy defeated, the young man agrees with the leader's previous accusations. With his hand reached out, the boy confirms that his only gift is creating these protections. However, he points out that these abilities are surprisingly very versatile. Standing in front of the fallen creature, the commoner explains that he can also go on the offensive. His power has 3 forms, which are attack mode, defense mode, and support. Suddenly, a whole flock of those same dragons appears flying around the area. Surrounded on all sides, the warrior faces the beasts that are completely taking over the sky. Feeling tired, the boy complains about his terrible luck of running into so many monsters while being in such a rush. Accepting his sad nickname, he brings his hands together to focus a lot of mana. Glowing brightly, the boy states that he trained hard to master his barrier, preparing his ultimate move. The outcast unleashes the class's second secret technique. At that moment, a massive flash of light bursts forth, tearing across the entire battlefield. The powerful magic swallows the whole flock, wiping out the dragons in the blink of an eye. Soon, the heavy storm disappears, revealing a beautiful, very calm blue sky. Looking at the beautiful scenery, the protagonist sighs with relief for having survived all of that. The scene cuts to a location far, far away from the grand capital, showing a long journey to the southwest of that vast region. There, we see a quiet rural village in the middle of the mountains, revealing the humble place where our mage grew up. Walking through the calm dirt streets, the young man in the dark cloak finally arrives at his old home, looking a bit tired. With a somewhat empty gaze, he walks alone, processing all the bad things that had just happened with his recent expulsion. The boy's heavy steps kick up dust from the ground as he moves forward, not paying much attention to his surroundings. Suddenly, he bumps right into a large villager who immediately turns around, very annoyed and demanding an explanation. The rude man shouts right in the poor traveler's face, complaining about his attitude for not watching where he was going. Before the fight can get any worse, a girl in a blue dress suddenly appears, telling the big guy to stop all the commotion. This beautiful blonde young woman with a stern look is known there as Miss Flair and seems to be highly respected by the people of the village. Full of attitude, she walks firmly toward the 2 young men, showing that she won't tolerate any trouble on her street. The young woman asks what's happening, so the villager tries to explain, saying that the stranger didn't apologize. Lacking patience, the blonde woman retorts, telling the man that this isn't the right way to treat someone who has just arrived. She points out that the traveler already looked very down and sad, and because of that, he didn't deserve to hear all that unnecessary shouting. Embarrassed, the man scratches his head and apologizes to the girl, but she quickly tells him to apologize to the stranger instead. Maintaining a firm posture, the blonde demands that the bullying villager acknowledge his mistake for bumping into the young man so roughly. Watching all of this, the outcast's eyes widen, completely surprised that someone would defend him in such a kind way. Mustering his courage, the young spellcaster opens his mouth and finally apologizes for his small oversight in a very polite manner. With the situation resolved, the villager walks away down the dirt streets, leaving the pair alone in the middle of the calm village. The tense atmosphere disappears when the caretaker flashes a beautiful smile and welcomes him. Noting that it's been a year since his last visit, the mage agrees, very relieved, and receives a tight hug from his dear friend, who confesses she missed him immensely. Worried, the blonde notices the tired look on the young man's face and asks if something bad happened to him. This beautiful young woman's name is Flair Serial, and upon hearing the question, The boy swallows hard, becoming very tense. The young woman is the daughter of the director of the orphanage, where the exile grew up, having spent their entire childhood together there. From their school days until she became a royal mage, the girl had always been his greatest partner. Being his pillar of support, his companion never let go of the hero's hand, helping him through the worst of times. Chatting in a tavern, the exile explains how the guards blocked his entry to the royal castle. The spellcaster then reveals he came to the village only to say his goodbyes before leaving the country. Listening to the whole sad story, his friend understands the situation and announces that she's leaving with him. Completely shocked, the mage's eyes widen, trying to understand what he just heard. Remaining calm, the young woman reinforces her decision and confesses that she feels a great love for the protagonist. The boy is dying of embarrassment, while the sorceress assures him that she will follow him everywhere he goes. With a very caring gesture, his friend holds the warrior's hand, giving him a great sense of security. Smiling, the blonde woman states that she loves the young man's effort, seeing him as the great man in her life. Shyly, the young man apologizes for all of this, but the woman assures him there's no reason to be afraid. She recalls the past when the hero would send all his money to help raise the orphans. Changing the subject, his companion reveals that the orphanage director has become the head of the local guild. The outcast is startled by the news and is even more surprised to learn that the old man is getting married. Sharing a secret, the blonde explains that her father has finally moved on from his past as a widower to try and find happiness. Listening intently, the traveler discovers that his friend's new stepmother is a very hard-working woman. Thanks to all this effort, the institution is no longer in poverty and doesn't need the mage's donations anymore. The exile listens to his friend and finally understands the new situation at the orphanage. In a gentle tone, the young woman reminds him that he has already worked so hard and now has the right to live as he pleases. With a serious look, the protagonist repeats those sweet words, reflecting on this sudden freedom. Suddenly, the blonde squeezes his hand tightly and asks if the warrior feels any resentment toward her. Mustering his courage, the young man looks deep into his companion's eyes and confesses his great love for her very directly. Very happy, his friend rests her forehead on his hands, stating that being by the hero's side is her greatest joy in life. The young man then confesses that he was already planning to reveal all these strong feelings at their next meeting. Full of attitude, the mage scoffs at the kingdom, thinking it's great that they're leaving a place that throws away a hardworking person. With a beautiful smile, the blue-haired mage agrees with his partner, feeling an enormous sense of relief in his chest. Then, his companion officially asks to travel with her beloved, leaving that village behind forever. With that, the young man accepts her company, forming a new couple ready to live an adventure far, far away. Meanwhile, in the grand royal capital, a furious shout echoes all around, showing someone is quite upset. The majestic king of that nation demands, at the top of his lungs, that they bring his foolish son to the throne room immediately. The monarch also orders that the guard who barred the mage be sent to work in the mines as a harsh punishment. The advisor thinks this is all an exaggeration, but the old king threatens to send him along for doubting the commoner's power. Resting his face in his hand, the ruler states with total certainty that the banished boy was a true genius. With a threatening gaze, the leader emphasizes that a talent like that only appears once every 1,000 long years. He mentions the gigantic, invisible magic dome that protects the entire capital against the attacks of ferocious monsters. Breaking into a cold sweat, the servant is in shock to hear that it was the outcast who created that colossal defense. The king finishes by confirming that the barrier manipulator also took out the fearsome invading dragons in the blink of an eye. The sovereign explains that there's a secret art within barrier techniques that the young man has completely mastered. This power goes far beyond human intellect, making any difficult task simple for the powerful mage. The monarch reveals that he is friends with the director of the Magic Academy, and the old educator always made a fuss about his talent. With a serious look, he repeats that a genius of this level is a rarity that only appears in the world once every millennium. He points upward, asking if the advisors know about the monster, repelling barrier that covers the capital. The man with glasses is in disbelief, as he thought it was impossible for that colossal defense to be the work of a single person. The king confirms that the disappearance of the dragons was the exile's doing, proving how he used barriers to attack in a lethal way. At that moment, the prince enters the hall, all happy, announcing that he has finally expelled the useless guard from the kingdom. Smiling, the clueless heir brags about getting rid of the criminal who is wasting precious tax money. Hearing that nonsense, the ruler trembles with rage as his blood pressure rises at the sight of his own son's stupidity. Screaming, the father calls the blonde boy a fool, making the spoiled brat tremble with fear. Not understanding the reason for his fury, the king shouts that his foolishness has set the world's strongest mage free, and now the consequences will shake the entire globe. Walking down the dark street, the girl says they need to say goodbye to Mr. Daryun. She smiles, saying that before they leave, they should announce their marriage, which makes him shy. Worried, the mage asks if she's sure about this, as she'll never be able to return home. Without a word, the young blonde woman jumps into her beloved's arms, giving him a very affectionate hug. The young woman reinforces that she has decided to support the warrior on his journey, but he tries to deny it all. Interrupting the young man, the mage assures him that it's all right, as she was the one who chose this path. With a loving gaze, she thanks her companion for allowing her to be by his side. Determined, the girl pulls him to talk to her father and tells the hero to act like a real man. The full moon shines in the sky, illuminating the beautiful night as the couple walks to their destination. Arriving at the house, they peek through the wooden window, seeing that their target is inside and awake. The older man notices their presence and frowns, trying to recognize the visitors. The man soon breaks into a smile upon seeing Riku, asking if the young man has been doing well lately. Without wasting any time, his daughter drops the bombshell, telling her father that she's going to marry the mage now. The shock comes when the old man accepts immediately, thinking it's great, but his son-in-law finds it all a bit too direct. Seriously, the veteran explains that he knows the boy's strength and his excellent character very well. He adds that he knows no one in the world values his daughter as much as the protagonist does. Laughing, the father-in-law admits he was already expecting this because the young woman couldn't stop talking about her beloved. Dying of embarrassment, the blonde kicks her father's shin hard to make him quiet down. While the old man yells in pain, the blushing young woman tells him to stop saying unnecessary things. Curious, the man asks where they will live, so the exile admits sheepishly that he has been banished. The girl tells her father all the gossip, revealing with outrage that the foolish prince called the hero useless. The father-in-law strokes his chin thoughtfully and casually comments that he trained that spoiled noble in the past. With his arms crossed, he reveals that he was an S-class adventurer, completely shocking his own daughter. The black-haired mage is indignant because the old man never told them anything so important. The veteran explains that it was a request from the king, but he ended up getting let go quickly for not pleasing the annoying heir. Hearing that, the protagonist realizes that the royal blonde has always been a huge fool from a very young age. Smiling gently, the man tells them to forget about it, as only his girl's happiness matters. Then, we see the man's feet walking across the wooden floor as he remembers something important. The former adventurer opens a small cabinet in the corner of the room, taking out a special item for the couple. Returning, he hands them a heavy bag of coins as a wedding gift for their long journey. The young man tries to refuse the valuable gift, feeling he didn't deserve to receive so much money like that. The father-in-law insists, explaining that this was the savings he had put aside specifically for her wedding. He smiles, turning down his son-in-law's donations and assuring him that he will protect the orphanage with his wife. The exile looks at the man with admiration, feeling enormous respect for his noble attitude. Accepting the gift, he hears his father In-law lament that his wife isn't home to meet the young man. The big surprise comes when he mentions that his wife is also an active S-class adventurer. The mood grows heavy when the warrior warns that vampires have been frequently seen in the region. The young man frowns, remembering that these immortal monsters live in the night, feeding on human blood. The veteran warns with a very serious look that there are bad rumors about the return of the Queen of the Night. This creature was an ancient vampire, so strong that she had to be sealed because no one could defeat her. Optimistically, the blonde girl breaks the heavy mood, assuring with a smile that they'll be fine. Full of pride, she points to her beloved, reminding everyone that he is the strongest barrier master. The black-haired mage smiles confidently, agreeing with his future wife's praise. Holding her hand firmly, the hero mentally promises that he won't let her get hurt. With a fearsome look, he decides that he will destroy any legendary vampire that appears. The father-in-law gets tense remembering the villain's immortality but soon trusts in his son-in-law's hidden power. Seriously, the protagonist guarantees that when it comes to protecting someone, he will never lose. The old man smiles, relieved by the answer, and asks him once more to take good care of his daughter. Suddenly, gigantic suitcases appear on the floor as the girl apologizes for the delay. The men are in shock at the absurd amount of luggage, not knowing how to carry it all. Laughing, the young woman asks if her father forgot who her fiancé is. As the young man activates his magic, the suitcases begin to glow brightly as he invokes barrier support form number 5. In an instant, all the heavy luggage disappears into thin air, stored inside a magical space. The former adventurer is impressed, remembering that the boy's barrier magic is out of the ordinary. The young man explains with a smile that he has secret techniques for attack, defense, and also support. Full of mystery, the shield manipulator hints that this isn't all he can do. The blonde brags that with her fiancé, they are safe, and no one is a match for his power. The young man gets serious, announcing that it's finally time to leave, and says goodbye to his father-in-law. The old man watches the two young adventurers with a look full of affection and pride. The boy bows, thanking him for everything, as the moon shines in the sky, marking the beginning of their journey. Walking down the road, the girl suggests they go to the neighboring empire, because there, commoners can become nobles through merit. The mage smiles, agreeing with the plan, but suddenly his expression changes as he senses a very strange presence. Stopping in the middle of the dark forest, the hero quickly asks his beloved to get inside a protective barrier. Confused, the blonde asks for the reason for all this, as the full moon illuminates his very tense face. Without explaining, the young man activates his magic, creating a glowing cube of energy around his fiancée. Shouting loudly, the warrior warns that the enemies are coming, preparing for the imminent combat. Just then, a gigantic explosion happens out of nowhere, kicking up a lot of dust and destroying the ground in that spot. The shield manipulator stands firm, facing the danger without retreating a single step. The smoke clears, revealing that his defense blocked everything, while a wicked laugh echoes through the night air. A woman with silver hair appears floating and greets the humans with a sadistic smile on her face. The protagonist recognizes the legendary vampire, who introduces herself as the feared and powerful Queen of the Night. Licking her lips, the villain says she smelled something delicious and decided to have a little snack now. The monster advances, but the young man acts fast, invoking the first attack form of his magic barrier. The power manifests as glowing star bullets that surround the mage, ready for the final shot. Hit, the immortal falls to the ground, confused, as physical attacks shouldn't work on the undead. The exile looks down, coldly telling the creature not to interfere with the couple's new beginning. Furious, the vampire tells him not to underestimate her, but the hero returns the phrase with much more authority, extending his hand. The mage of the Iron Wall announces that he will be the opponent who defeats her today. With a wicked smile, the vampire licks her lips, calling out the blonde girl's name with great malice. The young man then tells his beloved to wait quietly, assuring her that he won't let anyone lay a finger on her. The young woman agrees with a blushing face and tells the warrior to do his best in this difficult battle. With that, The mage turns to face the enemy while his fiancée watches everything from inside the protective cube. The Queen of the Night scoffs, saying he uses strange tricks, but they are no match for her power. Floating in the air, the villain releases an immense red aura that spreads throughout the dark forest. At that moment, the flowers in the field begin to wither, revealing the terrible magic of energy draining. In seconds, all the surrounding trees dry up completely, showing the strength of that ability. The monster then brags that she will drain all the life around her to become stronger. Watching everything, the shield manipulator understands the situation, while the enemy becomes very confused. The vampire is in total shock, screaming in surprise, unable to understand what is happening. She questions how the young man is still alive, as her power should drain the life of even an ancient dragon. In disbelief, the immortal shouts that it's impossible for a simple barrier magic to be immune to this. The creature asks how a shield that repels physical attacks managed to stop her energy-based strike. The mage explains that his barrier blocks any type of attack with the intent to harm. In a rage, the villain screams that she has never heard of such an absurd ability in her entire life. Seriously, the exile tells the enemy to remember this well before being completely defeated by him. The warrior then forms a seal with his hands, preparing his next attack with great concentration. With that, various glowing geometric shapes appear around the young man, showcasing his power. Struck, the vampire feels immense pain and realizes that the situation has become very bad for her. The vampire reveals her enormous bat wings and prepares her next strike with a furious look. The mage recognizes the technique and realizes the wings are made of the creature's own blood. With a smile, the villain confirms that her power is blood manipulation, flying with the wings. Shouting with hatred, the immortal tells the human to perish and fires a very powerful red beam. The attack, called a blood thread, advances like a great spear toward its target. The blood magic slams into the young man's defense, but the barrier withstands the strong impact. Unfazed, the warrior just watches the strike with a serious and very focused gaze. The enemy tells him to stand still and accept his defeat, as there's no way to escape. At that moment, the exile reveals the third defensive formula of his barrier transformation. Whispering the word, explosion, the spellcaster activates a new technique, glowing with great force. With that, the protection reflects the red power back, causing a huge shockwave. The vampire is in disbelief as she sees the blood thread being repelled, thinking it's impossible. Thrown backward, the legendary creature takes the full impact of her own attack. The monster's eyes glow red with hatred as she feels the pain of that powerful blow. Not understanding anything, the Queen of the Night screams in frustration at the unexpected turn of the fight. Fallen on the ground and injured, the immortal questions what happened, as she had never seen anything like it. She shouts that her spear was the strongest in the world, capable of piercing even a demon god. Calmly, the protagonist explains that he just reflected the attack using his own barrier. The villain is startled by the answer, so he explains that he made the shield's material very soft. Impressed, the enemy admits she never thought someone could use magic in that way. The mage notices that the enemy's body is regenerating very quickly and understands he's facing an immortal being. Panting, the monster shows her sharp canines, while the young man asks if she's already running out of breath. He mocks her, saying that the mighty queen is struggling against a mere human, and she yells at him to be quiet. At that moment, the villain asks what he really is, and the protagonist just smiles in a very mysterious way. Calmly, the young man claims to be just a flawed mage who can only use simple barriers and nothing more. Furious, the vampire shouts for him not to lie, because a useless person could never push her to this limit. She warns him not to be underestimated, as she comes from a noble lineage and guarantees she would never lose to a weak commoner. Just then, the hero's eyes glow intensely as he listens to the creature of darkness's furious cry. The monster activates a blood-strengthening technique, changing her appearance to become much faster and more lethal. With a swift movement, the villain tears through the air and rushes like a red lightning bolt toward her opponent's neck. Surprised by the absurd speed, The young man's eyes widen as he realizes the enemy is already right on top of him. In that instant, the queen gives a victorious smile and states that at this distance, he wouldn't have time to create shields. Then, the creature grabs the mage from behind with great force, thinking she has finally captured her prey. Keeping his gaze fixed, the young man shows no fear, even in the arms of that dangerous, immortal villain. Just then, the monster unleashes her secret art, creating giant claws of blood to begin draining all the hero's life. Laughing insanely, she announces that she will drain his life energy directly, and that it will all be over in a second. But the young man remains calm as the villain guarantees his life will wither away before so much dark power. Suddenly, the warrior opens his mouth and calmly whispers that he's still alive, leaving the queen utterly confused. Shocked, the vampire asks how this is possible, since with no space between them, no defense should work. The mage reveals that he used his fifth armor form, creating an invisible, microscopic barrier around his entire body. At that moment, the vampire looks startled and asks if the young man is really an ordinary human being. But the villain soon spreads her enormous wings to try and escape the complicated situation. Then, the Queen of the Night shouts that she will end the mage's life on their next encounter. With that, a glowing cage appears around the monster as she realizes something is blocking her path. But the hero announces that there won't be a next time, activating his secret prison technique. At that moment, the young man guarantees that he will destroy the creature's existence right there on the battlefield. But the young man apologizes and informs her that he will have to seal the enemy forever. He explains that since she is immortal and cannot be done away with, the only solution is to imprison her soul. With a determined look, the barrier master decides to erase the villain's presence from this world. The warrior then focuses all his mana to finish the job once and for all. Then, the queen realizes that the young man is a descendant of the ancient mages who sealed her people in the past. But she panics upon realizing that she is facing her greatest and only natural enemy. Desperate, the monster screams that she does not want to be trapped in a magic seal again. At that moment, the creature laments that she had just regained her freedom, only to lose everything now. With a firm movement, the protagonist unleashes his secret sealing art against the evil spirit. Then the glow fades, and the hero confirms that the sealing was completed successfully. At that moment, the young blonde woman watches from a distance and takes a deep breath, feeling an enormous sense of relief. With that, his girlfriend runs towards her beloved and celebrates the victory against the legendary vampire. But the young man just gives his companion a gentle smile, enjoying that moment of peace. At that moment, the hero remembers that his fiancée is actually known as a child of the sky. Curious, the young protagonist asks the meaning of the term, child of the sky, and hears that she is a very special being. At that moment, the blonde woman explains that because of this, various monsters will hunt the girl, wanting to steal her power. Sitting on top of several defeated beasts, she warns that the young man must protect Flair from all these terrible dangers, but the boy asks if his master can stay with his friend forever and receives an immediate no as a response. Calmly smoking, the woman states that she has her own work to do and therefore cannot take care of her daughter all the time. With that, she orders her apprentice to look after the blonde until the end of her life, even if things get very bad in the future. Then we see the couple smiling as the young man accepts the duty of protecting her at any cost, even if it costs him his life. Under the light of the full moon, the girl praises the young man's power, stating that he is simply incredible. The young woman then reinforces that it doesn't matter what the foolish prince said, because they will be fine even in exile. Then, the blonde woman guarantees that many people will still recognize his real worth as a barrier master. With a smile, the blue-haired mage thanks his beloved for her support, feeling that he now has a new purpose. But the hero asks for a moment to check the forest's surroundings, as he felt something strange in the air. At that moment, his companion agrees and lets the young man investigate the area while she waits safely. Suddenly, the young woman's eyes widen as she notices a mysterious glow appearing right in front of her out of nowhere. A small, silver cross pendant is lying on the dirt ground, drawing a lot of her attention. Curiously, the protagonist reaches out to pick up the object, but soon notices a very unexpected reaction. Holding the item, the young man says he knows the vampire can still hear him from inside that seal. Just then, a groan of pain comes from the sacred object, indicating that the creature of darkness is trapped inside. Surprised, the mage wonders about that sound of suffering as he observes the small, glowing accessory. Screaming, the villain laments having lost to a low-class human and does not accept the humiliating defeat. Filled with rage, the monster continues to scream that it's impossible for her to have been sealed by a simple commoner. At that moment, the hero tells the prisoner to wait a moment, as he intends to do something very different. Then, the young man focuses his mana on the pendant, causing an intense light to envelop the entire area in an instant. With that, the barrier's power begins to transform the seal's energy to manifest the vampire's physical form. An immense flash of light takes over the dark forest as the summoning process ends in an epic fashion. But to everyone's surprise, the Queen of the Night reappears, dressed as a very cute maid. Completely confused, the creature questions how she got out of the seal and why she is wearing that outfit. The mage explains that he just loosened the sealing technique a bit to let her appear in this physical form. The young man then informs her that her power, as a vampire, is trapped in the pendant, and the villain is amazed by such a level of sorcery. With a serious look, the young man reveals that he only brought the monster out because he has some questions and demands honest answers. But the prisoner puts on a mocking face, stating that she would never answer anything for a simple human like that commoner. Then, the protagonist activates a restraining magic, making the creature scream in pain as she's hit by the invisible force. At that moment, he threatens to put the villain back in the pendant or throw the object into the bottom of the ocean so she can never get out. Desperate, the immortal begs not to be imprisoned as she hates dark, tight spaces and starts calling him master. With that, the hero ceases the magic attack, releasing the girl from the crushing pressure while observing her frightened reaction. Panting, the silver-haired young woman complains about the total humiliation of being treated that way by someone she despised. But the prisoner soon feels the restraining magic again and realizes she has no choice but to obey the mage. The warrior asks for the creature's name, but she hesitates, as giving that information means surrendering her very existence. Yielding to the pressure, the young woman reveals her name is Carmilla Vlad Tepes, while looking at the protagonist with great anger. The young man then formally introduces himself as Riku and maintains a calm smile in the face of the dangerous Queen of the Night's fury. But the girl questions if he's not ashamed to interrogate a defenseless young woman in such a brutal and shameless way. Ignoring the complaint, he asks what the noble blood the villain mentioned during the confrontation in the dark forest means. Carmilla explains that the term refers to her clan of pure vampires, and the exile realizes there are other monsters like her. Then the small monster confirms the existence of others of her race, maintaining a constant look of contempt and superiority. Mockingly, the hero suggests she must be just a weak background character in the group, and the young woman retorts by calling the boy a freak. The immortal then shouts that the young man is too strong and that a sealing ritual like that should take hours with several mages. But the protagonist just replies that the comment was rude and assures her that he is just an ordinary human being and nothing more. The little villain then throws a tantrum, stating that a common human could never seal the Queen of the Night alone. But the blue-haired young man ignores her screams and asks what the other sealed vampires are planning to do now. At that moment, he stares intently at the prisoner, wanting to know why her seal broke before the others. Then, the young woman explains that in the past, she drank the blood of a barrier master, and thus learned how to undo her own seal. With that, the hero is surprised to discover that his servant also possesses the gift of manipulating magic defense techniques. The protagonist then asks if the young woman knows the names and all the abilities of her still imprisoned clan members. With a malicious smile, the girl confirms that she knows everything as they all belong to the same pure blood lineage. At that moment, the monster's red eyes glow intensely as she observes her new and powerful master. But the young man points his finger at the villain, making her wonder what terrible plan he has in mind. Then, the warrior authoritatively orders the Queen of Darkness to officially become his trusted familiar. The creature is in total shock, unable to believe that a superior being like herself should become the servant of a mere human. But the exile promises to give the young woman a little freedom if she hands over all her knowledge about her noble clan. In that instant, the young woman arrogantly refuses the offer, remembering that she carries the blood of a very important lineage. With that, the master reactivates the restraining magic, making the prisoner suffer from the crushing pressure of the seal. Then, the girl screams in pain as the hero's blue energy completely dominates the insolent vampire's body. At that moment, the young man calmly observes the silver pendant as his servant understands that she has no choice. But the young man coldly states that this is not a request or a proposal, as the decision has already been made and cannot be changed. The small monster then calls her master a demon and claims that he is much worse than any evil creature. With an ironic smile, the protagonist accepts the insult as if it were a great compliment coming from someone so dangerous. Under the moonlight, the prisoner asks the reason for this need, while he states that he needs wisdom to win. At that moment, the prisoner says she won't betray her clan, but the young man asks if she wants to stay sealed forever, so she apologizes. With that, the mage orders the monster not to say anything, because he doesn't want his beloved to notice her presence, so they decide to use telepathy. Soon after, the beautiful blonde approaches the hero and asks if everything is okay, observing the surroundings with a curious gaze. In that instant, the blue-haired young man gently pats his girlfriend's head to calm her down in a very kind and caring way. With a smile, the warrior states that there are no problems, and his companion is very happy to know the danger has passed. Then, the blonde girl gives the young man a very tight hug, showing all her love and affection for him in that peaceful moment in the forest. At that moment, the vampire senses a strange scent coming from the young woman and begins to suspect something very important about her past. Watching from inside the pendant, the creature of darkness wonders if that human belongs to a very specific bloodline. But the protagonist announces that they need to leave now and begins to prepare a very rare secret barrier transformation technique. With that, he uses the creation of all things and conjures a complete carriage with a horse out of thin air, leaving his beloved shocked. At that moment, the immortal servant is completely speechless upon seeing that absurd magic and screams in surprise inside her master's mind. Then, the young man calmly explains that he just created the vehicle using his barriers, but the small monster doesn't understand how that's possible. With great patience, he explains that he uses tiny shields as if they were atoms to generate any type of matter he desires now. The Queen of the Night then completely freaks out, stating that this is not simple at all and calls the hero a freak for possessing so much power. Finally, the journey of this unusual group truly begins as they travel on, not knowing what challenges await them in the future. With that, they continue their journey in the barrier carriage, taking the legendary vampire as the new familiar of their small team. At that moment, the mage explains that he can control everything he creates, so the journey proceeds without needing a regular driver. Then, the hero asks if the young woman really likes that little creature so much, and she responds with a big smile that she does. We then see the blonde woman squeezing the small black animal, which is actually the sealed monster transformed into a very cute cat. The feline seems very uncomfortable with all the affection, but can do nothing to escape the young woman's arms. At that moment, the young man reveals that the cat is the Queen of the Night, Carmilla, and she continues to complain a lot inside his mind. All this is happening because the servant wouldn't stop complaining about being trapped inside that small silver cross pendant. So, the master created that animal body using his barriers to serve as a vessel for the immortal villain's soul. At that moment, his companion asks where he found such a cute little thing, and the young man makes up an excuse on the spot. The young woman then asks to keep the kitten, and the protagonist agrees, feeling a twinge of jealousy about the whole situation. With that, the warrior makes a grumpy face, because he wished he were in the creature's place, receiving all that special attention from her. But the vampire soon warns that it's not the time for jealousy, as she sensed something very strange happening just outside. At that moment, the mage goes on high alert and tells his beloved that he's getting out of the carriage to check the road ahead. Then, the young woman insists on accompanying her beloved, and the two get out of the vehicle to see what's causing all the commotion. They then walk through the dark forest and find several soldiers fallen on the dirt ground in a scene of great defeat. At that moment, we see several warriors in armor groaning in pain as they try to stay alive after a very brutal combat. One of the guards complains that he is in a lot of pain and seems to be in serious condition, begging for any kind of real help. Then, the pair observes the scene with a look of total shock, as they never imagined seeing so many injured people in one place. The combatants then start shouting, desperately asking for healing potions to try and save their comrades' lives. The leader of that squad orders them to bring all available medicine, but their situation seems very desperate. Riku looks at the scene with a very serious face as he notices the suffering of those men in the middle of the woods. With that, the blue-haired young man tells Flare that he will be a little late to provide aid to the guards, but the blonde young woman replies that it's okay and decides to help as well, facing the situation with great determination and courage. At that moment, the hero focuses his gaze on one of the injured combatants who seems to be in a much more critical situation. Then, the young man approaches a warrior leaning against a tree and asks if the man is okay. Calmly, the mage explains that he is just a traveler with some knowledge of healing arts and intends to help. The soldier sighs in relief, saying that the help would be great, and points to his other fallen comrades nearby. But the protagonist pauses for a moment, realizing that this specific man's condition is very worrying. He then notices that the warrior's left arm is severely injured and in a truly deplorable state. With a pained look, the combatant reveals that the injury was caused by a gigantic and very dangerous creature. The guard explains that the group was hunting a ferocious beast, but the creature fought back and caused all that damage. At that moment, the vampire transformed into a cat starts to tremble, indicating that something terrible is about to happen. Worried, the blonde pets the feline and asks what's wrong. As the little creature won't stop shaking, the small creature of darkness is on high alert, sensing a malicious presence that only she can identify. Determined to act, the barrier master states that he will begin treating the serious injury immediately. The soldier tries to refuse, saying that a lost limb cannot be healed, but the young man assures him that he can do it. Then, the hero activates his auxiliary formula number 2, preparing a very advanced barrier transformation technique. A bluish light then envelops the area, and the power begins to reconstruct the part of the body that was damaged. With an intense glow, the magic makes the impossible happen, leaving the man in armor completely shocked by the result. The warrior celebrates the return of his arm, calling it a miracle, and thanks the young man, because now he can return to the hunt. The young man, shaking the guard's hand, asks about the term, pray, while the soldier shows immense gratitude for the help. With that, the vampire cat realizes the human is talking about her and becomes very apprehensive about this sudden revelation. Then, the warrior shouts to all his friends, announcing that they were saved by a very famous and skilled healer. But the blue-haired young man gets embarrassed and tries to explain that he's not exactly a real professional medic. At that moment, the combatant begs in tears for the young man to save his injured companions, who are lying there. With a focused gaze, the hero activates his barrier expansion, creating a gigantic dome of light that covers the entire forest area. He then unleashes the mass healing technique as a very bright bluish energy takes over the entire dark environment. With that, the injured soldiers begin to feel the effects of the magic and are amazed by the immediate sense of relief. At that moment, we see several men regaining their strength very quickly, as the divine light continues to shine brightly. Then, the guards get up, celebrating life, and wonder what kind of supernatural power could do that. One of the men claims that the protagonist is a true god, or perhaps a walking healing temple that fell from the sky. But the young man reinforces that he is none of that and identifies himself only as a very modest barrier arts master. The leader of the group then becomes confused, wanting to understand how a defensive technique can heal such deep wounds. Calmly, the young man begins to detail how his shield works and how it affects the bodies of the people inside. He explains that the barrier has a high concentration of oxygen and light magic that accelerates the natural healing of any being. At that moment, the soldier admits he didn't understand the technical part at all but guarantees that the result is simply phenomenal. Then, the hero asks about the dangerous beast the squad was trying to hunt before that brutal defeat. Seriously, the combatant asks the mage to be very careful, as there is a creature called prey that inhabits those dense woods. The commoner then repeats the word vampire with a thoughtful look, while the cat's servant listens closely. The man finishes by revealing that the target is the feared queen of the night, and the protagonist looks at the kitten in his beloved's lap. The mage has a blank look on his face and wonders how that little kitten could be a powerful vampire, while the servant screams in his mind. The young man then announces that he has already sealed the queen of the night, so the soldiers can relax and don't need to worry about it anymore. The group's leader is in total shock, screaming in surprise, unable to believe what she just heard. She then asks for the hero's name, and the blue-haired young man introduces himself as Rikuto Guardman in a very humble way. With a confident smile, the warrior reveals her name is Saraj, and she is the captain of the famous prey hunting squad. The protagonist becomes curious about her team's title and tries to understand the organization's real objective. At that moment, the vampire cat explains telepathically that they are specialists in the extermination of all her kind. The mage is startled by the news, as he had never heard of a group with such a specific and dangerous purpose. With that, Saraj bows as a sign of respect and asks the young man to join their squad as a new member. But the barrier master refuses the invitation on the spot, leaving the captain completely confused by the rejection. The warrior explains that with his power, saving the world would be a very simple task. But the hero doesn't think the same way. With a serene smile, he states that he has no interest in saving the world and only wants to protect the small happiness right in front of him. The young man looks at his beloved and reinforces that this is his one and only true goal in life at this moment. Even so, the group's leader insists desperately for him to join the team, pulling on the mage's clothes with force. The woman starts dragging the young man across the ground, while shouting that they need to hunt vampires and protect the world together. At that moment, we see the hero being carried down the dirt road, while the girl screams for him to listen to her proposal. Inside the carriage, his companion asks about his future plans, and he replies that he intends to become a common adventurer. The blonde questions why he doesn't join the prey hunters, as he would have a stable salary and a very peaceful life. But the exile reveals that the organization doesn't pay a single gold coin for defeating the blood-sucking monsters. The young woman then becomes indignant upon discovering that they also don't receive a fixed salary and realizes how exploitative the group is. Watching everything, the kitten Carmilla questions how those prey hunters manage to continue with this job. She then discovers that the reason is a noble sense of duty, but soon calls them all crazy and lunatic. At that moment, the protagonist reflects that he needs a lot of money if he wants to live peacefully with Flair. With a thoughtful look, the young man admits that it won't be easy to find a job using magic, being a flawed mage. The servant then asks if her master has ever been an adventurer before, as only real skills are considered there. The young man denies the question and explains that he went straight from his village to the Royal Academy and then worked at the court. Worried, the small creature faces the young man and asks if he'll really be okay acting as a beginner on missions. With a frightening expression, the hero threatens to obliterate the vampire, making the kitten let out a cry of terror and tremble all over. Regaining his composure, the warrior assures her that he had rigorous training with his master and has real combat experience. Sitting next to him, his fiancée becomes curious about this mentor who taught him all the basic and advanced barrier techniques. Suddenly, a monstrous roar tears through the night silence, putting the blue-haired boy on high alert. With agility, the mage opens the curtain of his magic carriage to see what's happening outside on the road. At that moment, he gives a sideways smile, stating that the timing is perfect for what is about to appear before him. A colossal beast appears flying through the sky, revealing itself to be a gigantic dragon, ready to attack any traveler in its path. Terrified, the servant warns that it's a powerful monster, but the young man shows no concern about the threat. He remembers that during his training, he defeated several of these creatures, and that the beast's body is worth a lot of gold on the market. With a quick movement, the hero extends his hand, invoking a glowing barrier that manifests as a luminous cube. Thinking about the profit, the spellcaster states that the material from that creature will be sold for a very high price in the next town. Hit squarely by the magic, the dragon loses control of its flight and crashes to the ground, creating a large impact wave. Seeing the monster defeated, the young man celebrates the success of his technique as he prepares to collect his valuable prize. With that, the small cat Carmilla panics, asking what her master just did to that monster. The young man then calmly explains that he just suffocated the beast using his barrier, leaving the servant in total shock. The creature of darkness then wants to understand how the hero managed to suffocate a dragon so simply and directly. With a serene look, the mage says that activating a shield means dominating that entire space, which is very natural for him. But the vampire shouts that there's nothing normal about it and questions why the young man is so detached from reality. At that moment, the commoner states that he has never met other barrier masters and therefore has no one to compare himself to. With that, the servant understands that his magic is so specific that the young man doesn't even realize how out of the ordinary he really is. The kitten then asks why he suffocated the beast instead of using that star-shot attack he showed earlier. The warrior then explains that an explosive attack would destroy the valuable scales and lower the selling price of the carcass. With a sideways smile, the master confirms that keeping the body intact is essential to get more gold coins. At that moment, the protagonist extends his hand forward, preparing to use another impressive magic trick. The young man then activates his secret storage technique, causing an immense flash to envelop the entire body of the fallen dragon. But the servant screams desperately, wanting to know what just happened, as the giant beast vanished out of nowhere. The mage then reveals that he stored the carcass inside a shield, leaving the small creature even more confused by it all. Calmly, the hero details that his magic walls are a type of spatial magic that creates a dimension outside of this world. At that moment, the immortal vampire stares at her master with a look of total disbelief, processing that absurd information. But the young man continues his explanation, saying that this auxiliary formula is used to store any object in that void. With that, the kitten calls the young man weird, but he just agrees, remembering that he's considered a flawed mage. The creature then states that the boy's common sense is all broken because he lives in this abnormal state every day. The master then asks if she's calling him weak, but the servant yells that the young man is just too strong. The small cat then asks how he came to that conclusion, but the mage says that everyone calls him a flawed product. Calmly, the young man asks if the vampires were strong in the past, while looking at his servant with a look of total doubt. Annoyed, the small monster states that in the old days, they were feared for being the most powerful species that ever existed. The young man then says that talking about the past doesn't help at all, and Carmilla starts thrashing on the ground in a rage. At that moment, the hero picks up the animal by the neck and announces that it's time for everyone to return to the carriage now. With that, the master carries his servant very casually as he walks back to meet his beloved fiancée. The creature's red eyes then glow intensely as she whispers the young man's name inside her mind. But suddenly, the commoner senses something very bad approaching and notices several dragons flying in the sky. With that, the protagonist observes the immense flock of winged beasts that cover the entire view of the dark and gloomy forest. In that instant, we see an absurd number of monsters surrounding the area, making the battle atmosphere much more tense. But the blue-haired mage cracks a greedy smile and states that he's looking at a veritable mountain of treasure. The small feline's eyes then widen, and she wonders if her master really intends to face them all alone. With a look full of confidence, the young man confirms that he will act, as he can't let this chance for profit pass him by today. At that moment, the spellcaster forms a seal with his hands to activate his spiritual barrier formula with great mastery. A giant, luminous structure then appears in the air, revealing the secret technique of the birdcage-shaped prison. With that, all the dragons in the flock are trapped inside the colossal defense with no escape route. In that instant, the magical pressure begins to crush the beasts, and the kitten watches everything with a look of total astonishment. But the hero frowns for a moment, noticing that something very strange is happening in the midst of the chaos. With that, the young man senses the presence of a very different individual hidden among the carcasses of those winged monsters. Suddenly, a cutting blow tears through the air, and the servant screams, as it's the first time she's seen her master's barrier be broken. The mage explains that the more he expands the shield, the weaker the defense becomes, so it's normal for it to have broken. With a serious look, the hero realizes that there is a very resilient creature in the midst of that flock of winged monsters. We then see a zombie dragon letting out a frightening roar as it tries to escape from that powerful magic prison. With that, the small cat reveals that it is a corpse dragon, and the young man asks what kind of creature that is. The servant then explains that the monster is a failure of the noble dragon lineage because it receives vampire blood when it perishes. With that, the rotten beast becomes a zombie in that state of total decomposition and becomes much more dangerous. The creature of darkness then asks if the master is still going to try to seal the beast, but he denies it, as he wouldn't be able to sell it. The commoner then questions if that creature is immortal, and the small feline stammers, saying she's not so sure. The blue-haired young man states that since the monster is not immortal like vampires, it becomes useless for his plans. With a quick movement, the hero joins his two hands, preparing a new magic technique with great concentration and focus. The servant then warns that the beast's flesh can pollute the land and air, but the master guarantees that none of that will happen. With that, the vampire is left with her mouth wide open, because leaving the beast, there would be a mistake, and she doesn't believe in the young man's confidence. The mage states that he knows this, and that's why he's going to blow everything up without leaving a single trace of dust on the battlefield. At that moment, the warrior begins to glow as he concentrates an absurd amount of mana for his next attack. The kitten is in total shock, screaming in surprise as she feels all that magic power being accumulated in a single point. With that, the young man gathers all his energy in his hands, creating a glowing sphere of light ready to be released now. The hero prepares to use his supreme art, and his eyes shine with a very impressive blue intensity. The sphere of light then transforms into a point of black energy that absorbs everything around it like a colossal whole. With a furious look, the master unleashes the void technique to completely erase the existence of those creatures. The power then expands in the form of a huge shadow that swallows the entire cage with all the dragons inside. At that moment, the zombie dragon lets out a final cry of agony as it is completely disintegrated by the strong magic. Under a reddish sky, we see the mage observing the result of his technique, while his servant seems to be afraid. The small kitten trembles with fear upon seeing the demonstration of destructive power and is left completely speechless. With that, she tries to flee from the terrifying scene, but soon realizes she has nowhere to go and ends up stopping right there. Desperate, the creature of darkness screams very loudly as she is sucked upwards by a very powerful invisible force. The young man looks at the blue sky and confirms that everything ended well as peace takes over the battlefield. With a serene smile on his face, the protagonist turns to his servant, looking quite satisfied with the result. The vampire screams, wanting to understand what that was all about, and the young man explains that it was his supreme art, the void wave. The small kitten then repeats the name of the technique, with a look of total disbelief, unable to believe her master's power. The commoner then details that there are tiny particles, called atoms, that make up everything that exists in that world. Confused, the creature of darkness tries to understand the logic behind that absurd magic, but can't process it all. The warrior reveals that he heard the principle of his technique was the same as a very powerful nuclear device. With that, the servant questions who would have told him something like that, but the young man admits he didn't quite understand it either. The small cat then gets a worried look, noticing that her master has no idea what he just did. She realizes that he can unleash such a great force without any awareness of the real danger it represents to everyone. The vampire warns that he is too dangerous to be loose in the world, as the clear sky reflects the calm of the forest. The barrier master agrees with the statement and admits that not understanding the power he wields could be a very bad thing in the future. With an angry look, the creature realizes that the young man is not taking the situation seriously and gets quite irritated with him. The servant then screams that that's not the problem, but rather the fact that he is extremely strong and too unpredictable. The small kitten finishes her scolding by asking what that destructive light was that erased everything from existence in the blink of an eye. The group finally arrives at the Madukas Empire, and the young man admires the beauty of the place while observing the large buildings. With that, his beloved explains that they are in the city of Saladius, a very bustling place filled with various travelers. We then see that the place serves as the gateway to the empire and is home to various different races living in harmony. The young man then notices the intense flow of pedestrians on the streets, showing how prosperous and full of life the region is. But the blonde suggests that they first look for an inn and then go to the Adventurers Guild. With an excited smile, the young woman shows a piece of paper, revealing that she has already chosen a great place for the couple to spend the night. They then stop in front of a very charming building that seems to be the accommodation recommended by his travel companion. Soon, the couple goes up the stairs and stops in front of the wooden door of the room reserved for the two young people's rest. At that moment, the mage's face turns all red, and he questions if this is really supposed to be happening right now. But upon entering the room, the hero notices that there is only a single double bed available for them to sleep in. With that, the beautiful young woman makes an angry expression, staring at her boyfriend, who seems very nervous. The young woman then asks provocatively if the young man wouldn't like to share the same room with her that night. Startled, the protagonist gestures with his hands, trying to explain himself as the atmosphere gets increasingly tense. But the blonde starts to laugh, saying it was just a little joke to lighten the mood between the couple. The girlfriend then opens her arms and tells her beloved to come closer with a very caring and loving look on her face. With his face on fire, the blue-haired warrior looks away, trying to process the whole romantic situation. Suddenly, a quick movement happens in the room as the two prepare to finally relax after their journey. His companion then pulls the young man onto the bed, stating that the journey was tiring and they deserve a rest now. The young man sighs, remembering that many crazy things have happened since he was recently exiled from his home country. Finally, his fiancée praises the master's effort and tells him to sleep well, as tomorrow will be full of new adventures. The young man wakes up feeling the exhaustion of the journey as the sunlight streams through the window of the small inn. Soon, he arrives in front of the Adventurers Guild and announces his intention to officially register today. With that, the hero asks if the creature will cause any trouble, but the blue-haired young man remains very calm. The small servant then assures him that nothing bad will happen as her master enters the enormous building. Walking with a firm stride, the young man advances down the luxurious corridor, ready to start his new career as an adventurer. The mage is then amazed to see that the doors open on their own. Noticing how advanced the technology is there, Observing the large hall, the commoner sees that the service counter is right at the back of the building. At that moment, the exile greets the woman at the counter and reveals his wish to become a professional adventurer. With a polite gesture, the receptionist places a form on the table, asking the young man to fill in his personal details. Holding the quill, the young man begins to write the necessary information to complete his registration at the guild. The warrior then finishes writing down his class as a mage, but the employee seems to find something strange on the paper. Surprised, the blonde asks if he really only has the barrier ability, and the young man seriously confirms the information. The boy states that this is the only power he can use, showing total confidence in his choice. Understanding the situation, the woman informs him that the candidate will need to take a mandatory exam to complete the process. The commoner is startled by the news, but the employee assures him that the test is not difficult and he shouldn't worry. In that instant, the attendant brings a glowing crystal ball, explaining that they need to measure his mana capacity. Suspicious, the young man asks if the item won't break, but she states that the object is enchanted and very durable. The hero then places his hand on the sphere, channeling his magic energy for the test to begin once and for all. In the blink of an eye, the crystal displays the number 150, leaving the master surprised by its quick operation. Amazed, the exile comments that he has never seen such a modern device in his old country. While the woman smiles, satisfied, the boy wonders if everything is okay, but a chubby fellow arrives with a very arrogant attitude, calling him a punk. At that moment, the mage looks to the side, trying to understand who this conceited stranger is who just interrupted everything. The pink-haired noble introduces himself as Kamas and claims to be an important member of the Empire's elite. With a very mocking smile, he asks if the commoner has been living under a rock for not knowing of his fame. The protagonist then questions what a rich kid is doing in a place like this, making the short man shout at him to be quiet. With that, the villain complains about hearing that a mage only uses barriers and scoffs at the magic capacity the hero claims to have. Annoyed, the young man asks to be left alone if the man has nothing important to discuss at that moment. But the spoiled brat claims he is just giving advice because a flawed product could never be an adventurer. In that instant, the master turns his attention back to the test and begins to release his mana much more intensely. Then, an immense flash of light takes over the room as the young man's power explodes, sending pieces of light flying everywhere. Shocked, the noble and the attendant's eyes widen as they witness that demonstration of raw, overwhelming force. At that moment, the spellcaster gives a victorious smile, knowing he has surpassed all the expectations of that modern guild. With that, the chubby fellow is left speechless as he sees the sacred object being destroyed by the dark-haired boy's bluish energy. The man then screams in terror, asking how that was possible since the item was considered indestructible by everyone. The employee then exclaims that it's impossible for the crystal to have broken, and is at a complete loss for what to do now. With a look of panic, the woman states that this event is unprecedented and tries to understand what really happened. At that moment, the exile realizes that the device simply couldn't handle his absurd power and finally gave way. With that, the hero remembers that he warned about the danger before starting and feels a bit embarrassed by all the commotion. The blonde then tries to regain focus and suggests moving on to the next phase of the exam, while the young man asks about the rest. Finally, the attendant explains that there are only 2 tests left: target practice and a real combat against someone. As mentioned before, we see the training yard, where the next stage of the official exam will now begin. The receptionist then explains that the next phase consists of a practical accuracy test against that distant target. Pointing to the object, the woman details that the item has magic tools to measure the force of the impact generated. With that, the blue-haired young man observes the colored circle while hearing that he needs to surpass a minimum score. The mage asks if the strike must be magical, or if other weapons are also allowed in the process. The employee assures him that any type of ranged attack will do, citing the use of a bow and arrow as a good example. Curious, the young man asks about the energy limit the target can withstand, wanting to avoid another disaster. Smiling, the blonde states that the structure is reinforced with stability spells, being considered completely indestructible. Thoughtfully, the exile decides that maybe he should hold back a bit to not cause more trouble in front of everyone. At that moment, the conceited pink-haired noble scoffs at the commoner's attitude, calling the boy arrogant once again. The chubby fellow insists that a failure, who only makes barriers, could never pierce such a resistant target. The villain then mocks, stating that the hero will fail miserably because his power is limited and completely useless. Remaining calm, the protagonist just observes the chatter, while the rich kid announces he will give a real demonstration. The man states that he will show how a real mage should act, but the boy just asks to be left alone. In that instant, the master fixes his gaze on his opponent, sensing that something very over the top is about to be cast. Full of rage, the noble shouts for the young man to witness the flames of his purgatory as he begins his attack. With a sharp movement, the enemy invokes the spirit of fire, asking the entity to reside in his hands now. An immense flaming sphere begins to glow intensely between the man's fingers as he prepares for the final shot. Shouting the word, "Fireball," the arrogant man unleashes all his destructive power toward the training target. With that, a gigantic explosion occurs in the middle of the field, kicking up a lot of smoke and covering the entire combat area. Kamas brags about his strength, while the attendant is impressed with the level of destruction he caused. With that, the panel shows 132 points, indicating that the noble surpassed the required average to pass. At that moment, the spoiled brat flashes a huge grin and asks if the commoner saw what a true master is capable of. Then, it's Rikudo's turn to take his test as he faces the target with a very focused and thoughtful look. Walking calmly, the young man positions himself and wonders if he should take the training completely seriously now. He then extends his hand toward the wooden circle, while the receptionist watches everything with great attention. The hero decides not to use his most powerful technique to avoid drawing too much attention from everyone. With a quick movement, the mage fires his star ability, which travels at high speed, cutting through the air. Then, a colossal beam of light crosses the area and blows up the back wall, generating an absurd impact. In place of the target, there is now only a perfect hole, showing that the attack went through the object effortlessly. Completely in shock, the receptionist and the pink-haired noble are left speechless by such a demonstration of power. The young man wonders why everyone is screaming like that and is confused by the pair's desperate reaction. The short man then yells, asking how the boy managed to use magic without performing any kind of sacred chant first. He explains that casting spells without words is an elite-level skill, but the commoner thinks it's the most normal thing in the world. The protagonist retorts that the noble himself didn't use chants either, making his adversary even more irritated. Watching from a distance, the cat servant wonders if her master truly understands how out of the ordinary he is. The employee explains that wordless shots are usually weak, yet the boy destroyed the item that was supposed to be unbreakable. With that, we see the deplorable state of the measuring equipment, which is now just a pile of useless shards on the ground. Rikudo finds all this very strange, as he's sure he held back his power a lot to avoid breaking anything again. In denial, the rich kid shouts that it's all a lie and questions how a barrier can be used to attack someone. The mage asks what he needs to do to be believed, so the noble demands an immediate duel against him right there. With that, the receptionist explains that the third test is usually a real fight against an official member of the guild. The short man then points at the hero, suggesting they face each other to be evaluated together in that open field. The woman then asks if the commoner agrees to this challenge while observing the calm face of the blue-haired young man. The young man accepts the combat, wanting to get it over with, but his opponent warns that he will show his true great power. With this decision, the two prepare for a magical shootout, and the villain states he is certain of his absolute victory. At that moment, the employee shouts, giving the starting signal, and the tension rises between the opponents in the stone courtyard. Soon, the pink-haired noble begins to invoke the spirit of flames, preparing a very heavy and hot fiery strike. Meanwhile, the protagonist observes the attack with total serenity, concentrating his mana silently and calmly. Then, an immense fireball is launched by the enemy, crossing the air with the sole purpose of burning the boy in black. But the hero activates his spiritual prison technique, and the blue glow of the barrier appears to confront the inferno. The opponent then scoffs at the simple defense and claims that nothing can stop the heat of his destructive and lethal spell. With a sideways smile, the mage says he doesn't intend to stop the strike, but rather to change the final destination of that solar energy. Confused, the chubby fellow yells in hatred, not understanding the commoner's words, as the sphere of heat advances rapidly. Suddenly, the spell makes an impossible turn in the air and changes direction, leaving everyone present completely startled. With that, the shot returns against its own creator, and the short man realizes the imminent danger, losing all his courage. Desperate, the villain panics, seeing his own attack returning with much greater force in his direction. In that instant, a cry of terror echoes through the courtyard as the man tries to escape the fire he himself conjured in the duel. Then, a colossal explosion engulfs the arrogant noble, generating a cloud of black smoke throughout the training area. Finally, the blue-clad warrior cracks a small, victorious smile, noticing that the combat ended very quickly and easily. Smiling, he explains that in just blocking the attack, he decided to make much better use of that energy. Fallen on the ground and smoking, the pink-haired noble wonders what on earth just happened in that duel. Calmly, the young man reveals that he reflected the magic using a special barrier and tells his opponent to look around now. The villain then realizes he's trapped in a giant, colorful cube while hearing about the magic mirror technique. Completely in disbelief, the short man yells that reflecting attack magics is impossible to do in practice. With a piercing gaze, the hero states that anything is possible for someone who truly masters the real arts of barriers. Feeling the weight of defeat, the spoiled brat laments as he realizes he doesn't stand a chance against that commoner. Clapping, the receptionist praises the young man's performance and assures him that he passed the exam with top marks. At that moment, the mage questions if his adversary also passed, showing a very unexpected concern. Surprised by the question, the woman confirms that the noble also passed, leaving the chubby fellow with his jaw on the floor. The young man admits that his opponent is strong enough to be an adventurer, despite all his arrogance. Observing the scene, the cat servant wonders if her master is a kind angel or just a dangerous threat to the world. With a beautiful smile, the attendant officially welcomes the newest member of the guild, Rikudo Guardman. She then reinforces that she welcomes the young man with open arms and great joy in her heart on this day. Maintaining his composure, the hero returns the gaze while processing that he now finally has a real job. The employee then introduces herself as Ranka and states that she is very happy to work alongside someone so talented. Excited, the blonde assures him that she is looking forward to the future missions the new adventurer will undertake in the Empire. Changing the subject, the commoner asks if the guild buys monster materials, as he defeated a beast on the way. Ranka suggests checking the item at the inner counter, but the young man says that won't be possible at all. Confused by the answer, the woman asks for the reason why he can't bring the material inside to the reception now. Rikudo admits that the dragon is too big and definitely won't fit inside the guild's small building. The employee, Ranka, is then left confused, trying to process what the boy just said to her. The blue-haired mage then begins to cast his magic, preparing to show the monster he took down on the road. Suddenly, an immense dragon appears in the middle of the courtyard, leaving everyone present completely speechless at the sight. With that, the receptionist lets out a cry of terror, wanting to know where he got that colossal, lifeless creature. The hero questions her surprise, reminding her that magic bags and spatial spells are quite common around there, but the blonde retorts that the commoner should only know how to use barrier magic, not storage tricks. At that moment, the young man states that it's possible to do anything with barriers if the user tries hard enough in training. The attendant sighs, thinking that it's not possible to do something so difficult with just a bit of effort and dedication. The protagonist then notices that the woman has given up trying to understand and wonders if he has confused her even more now. On the ground, we see the clean carcass of the dragon as the employee notes that she has never seen a corpse in such perfect condition. Curiously, she asks how the young man managed to defeat the beast without causing any damage to its body. The exile then calmly reveals that he simply suffocated the creature to its end during the confrontation in the dark forest. Surprised, the blonde asks if he threw the beast into the water, but the boy just observes the monster lying there in the courtyard. In that instant, the master explains that he used his barriers to remove the oxygen and quickly suffocate the target. With that, a sound of shock echoes through the place as the crowd and Ranka's eyes widen in disbelief. The adventurers around whisper, stating that this technique should be impossible for a beginner-level spell, but the master details that he covered the enemy's head and removed only the air from within his invisible dome. The woman then makes a face of total confusion, showing that the technical explanation was too complex for her right now. The young man apologizes for confusing her and assures her that he didn't use any tricks to defeat the dragon. The attendant, Ranka, flashes a wide smile, stating that everyone has now witnessed the hero's incredible ability. With a serious look, the blue-haired young man points to the enormous green dragon lying in the middle of the courtyard. The colossal beast remains motionless on the ground while the adventurers around observe its perfect state of preservation. At that moment, the woman at the reception, breaking into a cold sweat, announces that the guild unfortunately doesn't have the funds to buy the creature. She explains that a monster of this level is worth a fortune, and that the organization doesn't have that much gold on hand. Desperate, the young man screams in frustration, while the other travelers are shocked by the news of the lack of money. Ranka bows, apologizing, but the exile sighs, admitting that the mistake was his for not considering the guild's size. The boy then decides to change his plan and asks if there are any missions available for him to take on now. He then inquires about medicinal herb gathering tasks, and the blonde confirms there is a request to collect 1 kilogram. Without wasting time, the commoner accepts the harvesting job as he prepares to leave the enormous royal building. With a gentle gesture, the employee hands him the official request form and tells the young man to head to the nearby forest. At that moment, the mage thanks her for the help and says goodbye to everyone while the other adventurers watch the scene curiously. Soon, the hero's footsteps echo on the stone stairs as he hurries down to start his new job. Suddenly, the noble Kamas starts laughing mockingly upon discovering that the hero is just going to gather little plants. The chubby fellow walks, accompanied by his allies, and jokes that this is a task worthy of a fluid mage. But the protagonist ignores the insult and asks if his opponent has already recovered from the humiliating defeat he suffered in the duel. Annoyed, the villain announces that he is going to the woods to hunt real beasts, and not just weeds like the poor commoner. With a furious look, the rich kid tells the young man not to even step into the dense woods, because a piece of trash like him only knows how to defend himself. In that instant, the spoiled brat yells that he is just giving some kind advice, so the boy doesn't do things beyond his means. The chubby fellow then turns and leaves with his group, while Rikudo watches the whole scene with no patience at all. Observing the scene, the kitten wonders if that noble is a fool for underestimating her master, even after seeing such strength. At that moment, the hero reflects that people only see what they want and decides to focus on his new harvesting task now. With that, the young man starts walking toward the forest, stating that it's time to gather the requested medicinal herbs. The mage then arrives at the city limits and observes the landscape as he prepares to carry out the guild's service. Suddenly, the warrior activates his barrier magic, but in a totally unusual way that frightens his immortal servant. The small creature then lets out a cry of terror upon noticing that her master is floating in the air very casually. and quickly, with total tranquility, the young man lands in the middle of the dense woods, announcing that they have finally reached their destination today. In that instant, the master gives his companion a gentle smile while she continues to grumble about the whole situation. But the kitten Carmilla calls the young man a fool and asks why he is acting as if flying were a normal thing for everyone. The servant then questions how he can fly using only shields, and the exile reinforces that he used his barrier. At that moment, we see the silver pendant glow as the vampire's soul remains indignant with the hero's explanations. Screaming, the small monster states that none of it makes sense, and that his use of magic defies all logic in the world. Calmly, the protagonist explains that the principle behind his flight is actually very simple to understand, he says. The boy then bends down and picks up a small stone from the ground to demonstrate his theory to the very confused servant. The hero then creates a geometric barrier around the object, explaining that the shield is fixed to a coordinate in space. With that, the rock remains floating inside the magic vacuum, while the young man details how the physics of his magic works. At that moment, the commoner moves the protection with his hand and shows that the stone follows the dome's movement without falling to the dirt ground. The young man reveals that he just needs to envelop his own body in the shield and move it to be able to fly freely through the blue skies now. Arriving in the forest, the warrior prepares for the harvest, but the cat doubts that he knows how to identify the right plants. With a focused gaze, the master activates a giant barrier over all the vegetation, announcing that he will do something very different. Carmilla wonders if that noble is a complete idiot for doubting her master's strength, even after seeing everything. With a reflective look, the young man comments that people tend to see only what they wish to see. The hero then starts walking briskly and announces that it's time to finally gather the medicinal herbs. At that moment, the blue-haired young man prepares to act in the middle of the open field with great determination. The warrior then activates his barrier magic as he begins to explain how his spatial power works. But the servant panics, screaming in surprise as she sees the boy defy the laws of reality. With that, the commoner lands on the grass calmly, stating that they have already reached their intended destination. Remaining calm, the master gives his travel companion a gentle smile, who continues to complain a lot. The kitten then yells, telling him not to act so casually when he is a true freak of nature. Serenely, the protagonist explains that his flight follows a very simple and easy to understand principle. With a quick movement, the hero bends down and picks up a common stone from the ground to demonstrate his technique. In that instant, the young man creates a magic dome and sets exact coordinates in the air for his next step. The rock is then trapped inside the glowing vacuum, floating without falling to the forest's dirt ground. With that, the mage moves the shield with his hand, showing that the object follows the path he determines in the air. The young man reveals that he flies by enveloping his own body in the protection, while the servant glares at him with great contempt. Already in the woods, the creature asks if the boy can really identify the medicinal plants among the weeds. But the master just activates a colossal barrier over all the vegetation, announcing that the job will be quick. At that moment, the magic structure begins to shrink steadily, crushing everything inside it. The young man then activates the inventory function, causing an intense glow to cover the entire harvesting area now. The immortal servant is then left speechless, noticing her master's absurd idea, and admits that he is incredible. One of the noble's allies complains that he abandoned her to her fate while she runs desperately through the woods. But the spoiled brat shouts that his own life comes first and continues to flee without caring about anyone. Suddenly, the chubby fellow slams into something invisible and lets out a cry of pain, falling to the forest floor. Rikudo then appears and tells him to be quiet, as he has trapped him in a barrier cube so he won't interfere with the fight. Ignoring the insults, the blue-haired hero prepares an attack technique called a linked bullet. With that, a shot hits the monster that was chasing the girl, saving the adventurer's life right in the nick of time. The protagonist faces the defeated beast with a very serious and focused look intent on finishing the job quickly. The young woman who was saved turns to her benefactor and asks if he's okay after the quick confrontation. Sitting on the ground, the blonde woman thanks the young man profusely for appearing and preventing the worst from happening. With a small smile, the exile says she can thank him later, as the real danger isn't over yet. The girl is very confused by the answer and wonders what the young man meant by those words. Suddenly, a frightening roar echoes through the forest, and the atmosphere grows heavy with a malicious energy in the air. The conceited noble then begins to tremble with fear, sensing that something terrible is about to happen. A giant, muscular orc appears in the woods, and the short man recognizes the creature as the powerful bee, rank orc king. Terrified, the rich kid wonders why the monster is there and shouts that they are all completely doomed. The coward throws himself on the ground, crying and calling for his mother, while the hero observes everything calmly and without fear. With a look of pure fury, the beast faces the adventurers, ready to crush anyone who crosses its path. The colossal creature then leaps into the air with its club in hand to attack the blue-haired young man with full force. But the protagonist just cracks a confident smile, showing no concern for the impending blow. In the blink of an eye, the giant monster is trapped inside a complex, glowing, and very strong barrier cage. In shock, the noble wonders how the monster was sliced up so quickly and with no apparent effort. The protagonist then reveals that he used his wire attack form with the barrier's transformation. He explains that he just made the shield as thin as a thread to create a deadly and very sharp blade. But the spoiled brat doesn't accept that a flawed mage could use such a complex technique. The exile faces his rival with a serious and confident look after his overwhelming victory in the forest. With a smile, he warns that if the rich kid always thinks everything is impossible, he will never accomplish anything. The scene then cuts back to the adventurers' guild as a loud sound draws everyone's attention. Arriving at the location, the blue-haired young man notices a great commotion and a strange noise inside. Several warriors are gathered at the service counter, making the receptionist very tense about the situation. One of the men with a hat on his head seems to be begging for something, while the woman looks at him worriedly. The protagonist approaches to understand what's going on, and the employee immediately recognizes the young man. With relief, she says his timing is perfect and asks if he managed to get the medicinal herbs. The man in the hat turns and asks if the boy needs the plants, because they need a lot of them. Seriously, the hero asks for the exact quantity the man needs to solve the problem. Pointing his finger, the man states that they need at least 100 kilograms of all that material. The mage then strokes his chin thoughtfully and quietly repeats the large quantity that was requested. Seeing his hesitation, the adventurer asks if getting that much would be a very difficult task. But the young man reveals that he has 500 kilograms, and the man's eyes widen in disbelief. The receptionist is also astonished, and the boy admits that he got a bit carried away with the harvest. In disbelief, the woman repeats the question, and the hero extends his hand to show all the material he brought. He releases all the medicinal herbs, making a giant pile of leaves that leaves everyone inside the guild speechless. With that, the hero gets serious and asks if, by any chance, there were any casualties or injuries somewhere far away at that moment. The gentleman in the hat replies yes, because in a neighboring village, many residents have recently suffered various types of attacks. He then details that a distress message was sent urgently, asking for all available healing potions in stock. The mage then prepares his mana while holding the harvested material, ready to take the next step of his important mission. At that moment, the blue-haired young man questions if he should go there personally to treat all those serious injuries. But the man is startled and asks if the young man is a doctor. But the commoner states he is just a very experienced barrier master. He explains that he can use his shields to close wounds and heal people, leaving the gentleman very surprised by his power. With that, the man agrees on the spot, stating that he understands the situation perfectly and accepts the new Ali's help without hesitation. The gentleman guarantees that he will entrust everyone's lives to the boy, while the mage wonders if he really believes him so easily. At that moment, the adventurer smiles and says he has a trained eye for recognizing good and talented people like the protagonist. The exile focuses his gaze, showing that he is fully determined to solve this problem and save the kingdom's residents. With a firm handshake, the veteran asks the boy to take good care of that village and his friends in danger right now. The hero then asks for the exact location of the place and discovers that the town is called Itoi and is in a nearby kingdom. The protagonist then recognizes the destination's name and realizes the village is located right next to another famous region. He remembers that this place is a neighbor of Myoko and plans the best way to get to that area as quickly as possible today. But the gentleman says he has prepared a carriage for the journey. However, the barrier master states that he doesn't need any of that. The man doesn't understand what the young man means and watches the mage extend his hand to prepare his next great magic technique. With that, the warrior explains that he has passed through that town before and can fly there in just a few short moments. At that moment, the veteran is in shock, asking if he uses teleportation, and the hero just agrees, leaving now with the gentleman. In a flash of light, the pair appears in the middle of the square, and the boy reinforces that he is just a mage focused only on shields. The gentleman then opens his arms, overjoyed, praising the utility of that technique and confirming he has a good eye. With a gentle smile, the blue-haired hero calls his companion to hurry to the rescue site. The exile then moves forward, very focused and determined to heal all the injured people in that village as quickly as he can. But suddenly, the two stop in the middle of the road, completely confused by the bizarre scene that appears before them. At that moment, a giant green monster raises its wooden club, attacking the residents of that poor place. The ferocious beast charges forward, baring its sharp teeth, as the barrier master notices there are several orcs. Soon, other muscular creatures appear, attacking the adventurers there without giving them any chance to defend themselves. With that, a warrior tries to defend himself from the heavy blow, but the impact of the attack kicks up a lot of dust from the ground. The boy in black observes the knight blocking the club with his shield and notes the absurd number of beasts there. A larger and even more frightening orc then lets out a heavy roar, showing all the fury of that enemy race. Then, a terrifying sight is revealed, showing an entire army of those creatures covering the entire large field. Calmly, the protagonist explains that monsters short on food tend to gather in large groups like this. The young man deduces that the city is suffering a massive invasion, also known as the Dreaded Monster March. Terrified by the imminent danger, the merchant in the hat breaks into a cold sweat and asks what they are going to do in the face of this chaos. Without wasting time, the warrior creates a luminous protective box around the gentleman and tells him to stay inside. With that, the mage raises his hand and concentrates an immense amount of bluish mana to prepare his great magic. Maintaining a very fixed and serious gaze, the boy states with great conviction that he will end all of this in an instant. At that moment, the manipulator fires his spatial technique, unleashing a colossal spell across the entire terrain. A giant, glowing cage engulfs the entire orc horde, leaving a blonde adventurer confused by that magic. With a subtle hand movement, he shows that the defense has some hidden and very lethal surprises. The same blonde warrior then tries to advance, but realizes that the barrier only lets allies pass through. He then announces that the magic is special and that all humans can pass through it without a problem. Seeing the orcs trapped, the residents celebrate, and the blue-haired young man explains that he will finish everything. The combatants then observe the scene, and one of them suggests attacking the beasts while they are immobile. The protagonist rejects the idea, and a frightened merchant asks what he intends to do with the army. Clenching his fist, the barrier master begins to rapidly shrink the cage, crushing all the orcs. One of the adventurers shouts in fear, seeing the shield decrease in size and the beasts suffering inside. In a blinding flash, the geometric prison vanishes, and the monsters disappear without a trace. The blonde warrior comments that the tactic was brutal, but at the same time incredible for being so efficient. The other adventurers shout with joy and celebrate the victory, raising their swords to the blue sky. The gentleman in the hat thanks the young man, crying and saying that thanks to him, the entire village was saved. The hero smiles back as peace returns to the small town that was being invaded by the beasts. The scene cuts to a large church, where the protagonist announces that he will begin healing the injured there. All the injured are in shock as they feel their wounds closing rapidly without any pain. Standing in a hallway, the blue-haired young man watches his pet kitten walking on the red carpet. With a serene look, he surveys the environment and prepares for the next step of his rescue mission. Suddenly, a cry of pain startles everyone as a woman tries to care for a badly injured man. Without wasting time, the protagonist approaches the couple with a determined and very focused look. The woman tries to explain the situation, but the hero just extends his hand, and a blue light shines intensely. In the scene, we see a woman crying over the body of a man who seems to have passed from this life for good. With an attentive gaze, the blue-haired young man observes the scene of mourning inside the large, silent church. The gentleman in the hat then approaches and immensely thanks the hero for all his valuable help today. Bowing, the merchant states that if the young man hadn't been there, the outcome would have been much worse for everyone. But the protagonist announces that his work is not yet over, leaving the veteran completely confused. The exile maintains a serious posture, while the gentleman tries to bring up the subject of a monetary reward now. Confused, the adventurer asks what he means by that. Since all the orcs were dealt with, at that moment, we see the blonde woman suffering greatly for the loss of that dear person lying on the bench. The mage then drops the bombshell, announcing that he still needs to bring back the people who passed away today. The merchant is then left with his mouth wide open, unable to believe that someone could perform such a divine miracle. Firmly, the young man confirms that he intends to bring back those who are lost, and the black kitten's eyes widen in shock. The immortal servant then questions if this is even possible, as not even the highest magic in the world can do such a thing. With total calm, the barrier master assures her that he can, and maintains his gaze focused on the objective. The vampire in feline form then panics and starts screaming desperately inside the master's mind. Unbalanced, the small monster falls backward, stating that bringing someone back from their end is completely surreal. With that, the creature rolls on the carpet, while the hero remains motionless, preparing for his greatest sorcery. Notice how the small servant's tail trembles with fear as she realizes the hero is not joking about this matter. Screaming, the creature insists that bringing back the departed is impossible for any living being to do. But the commoner ignores the outburst and repeats that it is possible to perform this task using his special techniques. The warrior then joins his hands and announces that despite there being many rules, he will begin the ritual now. An intense light descends from the church ceiling as the hero begins to invoke his supreme-level secret art. At that moment, he activates the construction of the sacred realm, focusing all his energy to perform the impossible now. The kitten realizes that this is the power of purification and explains that it is the highest level of healing that exists. With that, the servant wonders if her master has created a domain where only gods could truly dwell. The mage praises his partner's knowledge, while maintaining a confident smile, even in the face of such difficulty. Soon, we see souls being summoned from the heavens to return to their proper vessels in that sacred place. A brilliant energy enters the deceased's chest, beginning the process of revival that defies all natural laws. Sweeting profusely, the commoner states that the spirit has already returned to the body, but that the work still requires a lot of focus from him. The young man then begins to close the person's final wounds, using his mana to reconstruct the damaged tissues. Suddenly, the man lets out a heavy sigh and opens his eyes, showing that life has finally returned to him now. The blonde woman jumps onto her beloved's neck, crying with joy upon realizing that the miracle really happened. Observing everyone's happiness, the spellcaster sits on the floor, exhausted after using an absurd amount of real magic. The kitten Carmilla then reflects that bringing a soul back is something no human being should be capable of doing. He explains that there are strict limits, such as the body needing to be present and the passing having been very recent. Even so, the immortal servant looks at him with admiration, realizing that her master has surpassed all the limits of humanity. With a tired look, the blue-haired young man tries to catch his breath as commotion takes over the entire church. But suddenly, all the saved residents kneel before the warrior as a sign of deep respect and gratitude. Greatly startled, the hero is left speechless, noticing that he has suddenly become the center of attention. The merchant shouts in desperation, claiming that everything is clear now, and that the boy is actually a powerful deity. Under the cross, the protagonist feels very pressured with the title of a god, and wonders how to get out of this situation. The sacred symbol glows as a divine light, fills the entire environment of the ancient church. With that, the hero feels very awkward, realizing that everyone is treating him as if he were a real god. Walking hastily, the blue-haired young man decides to leave before the confusion gets any worse today. We then see the pair walking through the village streets as an air of mystery continues to linger. Curious, the kitten asks what her master's secret is, as his powers make no logical sense. Shouting, the servant recalls that he used a light of total destruction and then brought people back to life. She reinforces that no ordinary human could perform such feats and questions who trained the commoner. Keeping a steady pace, the mage begins to tell her about the person who taught him everything he knows today. The hero reveals that he had a master, and the vampire cat becomes interested in learning more about this mysterious mentor. He explains that his master could also only use a specific type of sorcery called no magic. We then see that there are 6 basic elements in the world, being earth and water, as well as fire and wind. The protagonist then points out that there is a very rare 7th element, which is precisely this null category. Walking through the city, the young man details that his barrier arts fall into this different group. Surprised, the small cat asks if this tutor would be even more powerful than the barrier master himself. With complete certainty, the young man states that his mentor is much stronger and possesses absurd knowledge. The warrior then reveals that this person's name is Lovemarie, leaving his immortal servant in total shock. The vampire freezes in the middle of the street with wide eyes, unable to believe what she just heard. Noticing her strange reaction, the exile asks what's wrong, but the small cat seems to have lost her voice. The creature then remembers that Lovemarie is one of the 8 most powerful mages to have ever walked the earth. She finishes by thinking that this woman is known as the fearsome witch of the world and carries a huge burden. The hero is confused by the titles, Witch of the World and Sentinel of the Underworld, wanting to know which one is correct. The small servant then explains that the second name is just an affectionate nickname that everyone gave his mentor. The kitten then details that the woman constantly watches over the land of the departed with great attention and extreme rigor. With that, the sentinel ensures that evil souls can never escape and return to the surface of the real world. We see an image of the powerful Lovemarie sitting on a rock throne, observing the flow of dark souls. At that moment, the legendary sorceress appears with a piercing gaze while lightning cuts through the dark sky in the background. The vampire states that all demonic beings feel immense dread just by hearing that dangerous woman's name. With a smile, the creature says that she now perfectly understands the reason for so much strength coming from her young master. The exile then agrees that her training was out of the ordinary, as she could defeat dragons using only her hands. The blue-haired young man comments that she didn't even need magic to defeat ancient and very powerful monsters. The hero then becomes thoughtful, remembering when he met his mentor on a day of very heavy rain in the past. We see the small boy huddled on the ground, while the witch observes him from above with a very imposing and serious posture. Desperate, the servant begins to sob, having been captured by the disciple of that living legend. At that moment, the kitten feels very miserable and curses her luck for being stuck with the barrier master. But the hero asks her not to be so depressed as they walk through the city toward their next destination. With that, the small monster gets annoyed and shouts that he is the last person she wants to hear from right now. The scene soon cuts to the guild, where the matter with the merchant in the hat has been resolved very positively. The protagonist then tells the receptionist that he is leaving, but someone grabs his arm with force. Surprised, the commoner looks back and realizes that the blonde attendant doesn't want to let him leave so soon. In that instant, the blue-clad warrior asks what is happening while waiting for an explanation from the woman now. The attendant begs the mage to wait a little longer and says she will run to get the guild master now. At that moment, the blue-haired young man questions if the woman really needs something, as she seems very nervous. With that, the employee explains that the organization's leader wishes to have an important conversation with him in the near future. But the young man admits he is exhausted from his first mission and quickly declines the invitation right there. The hero then says he just wants to go home and rest, suggesting they leave the matter for another time. The cat servant then observes the conversation with an attentive gaze while her master tries to get out of the awkward situation. In a gentle tone, the exile apologizes to the receptionist, Ranka, indicating that he really can't stay. Suddenly, the protagonist extends his palm and activates a bright light between himself and the very surprised employee. The blue-clad warrior smiles, saying that the chat with the boss will have to wait, as he begins to vanish into thin air. In a flash of bluish light, the barrier master uses teleportation and disappears from in front of the blonde in a quick blink of an eye. Completely astonished, the woman is left with her jaw on the floor, unable to understand how the young man escaped in such a magical way. The scene changes, showing the ins facade as the hero reflects on how tiring today was. Entering the room, the blue-haired young man feels completely drained from all the effort he put in. Suddenly, the small cat Carmilla approaches the feet of his fiancée, who was eagerly awaiting her beloved's arrival. Very excited, the golden-haired woman shouts the young man's name and runs toward him, showing how much she missed him. With a caring movement, the blonde jumps into the mage's arms and gives her future husband a very tight hug. At that moment, the young woman flashes a radiant smile and states that his return is what matters most to her heart. The protagonist returns the gesture, saying that being home makes all his tiredness simply disappear at once. But the young man makes a startled face, noticing that his routine is returning to normal, and wonders if he can rest now. Observing the entire romantic scene, the immortal vampire has a very serious and suspicious look on her face. The hero then throws himself on the bed, feeling tired, while the blonde woman takes the opportunity to approach him affectionately. The couple then chats, sitting on the edge of the mattress, and she comments that he took a long time to return from the mission. With a serene look, the young man admits that a lot happened, and his fiancée praises the good work he did today. Thoughtfully, the exile reflects that he met many different types of people today, and notes how vast the world is. With that, the young man realizes that he now lives in a completely opposite environment from where he used to live in the past. Smiling, his companion reminds him that there are now many people who truly recognize her beloved's real worth. At that moment, the hero remembers the people who now depend on him, setting aside that annoying and envious noble. Observing the scene, the cat servant rests on top of the furniture while the atmosphere between the couple becomes increasingly light. Lying down, the commoner states that adventurer missions will help stabilize their income and bring a better life. With determination, the warrior looks into his beloved's eyes and promises that he will do everything to make her the happiest woman. Surprised by the declaration, the young blonde woman's cheeks flush and her eyes shine with emotion. The young woman then cracks a sweet smile, showing all her affection and care for the young man who changed her destiny. The fiancée then jumps onto the hero's chest again, knocking him onto the mattress in a moment of pure joy and fun. With their faces very close, a romantic atmosphere fills the room, leaving the blue-haired young man completely flustered. Shyly, the beautiful girl asks if she scared him and confesses that she couldn't hold back in the face of so much cuteness. Holding his hands, the blonde assures him that just the master's presence is enough for her to feel complete and happy. Looking at the ceiling, the protagonist says he understands her feelings and feels very grateful to have someone like her by his side. At that moment, the two hug each other tightly on the bed, enjoying that instant of peace and great unity. In the back of the room, the small cat Carmilla watches everything with a bored expression, not understanding how they can be so mushy. Finally, the young woman rests her head on her beloved's chest and closes her eyes, feeling safe and protected in his arms. At that moment, we see the kitten Carmilla cleaning her face with her paw while enjoying the calm of the inn-room. Soon after, the beautiful fiancée Flare leans over her beloved, showing all her affection and love in that special moment. Suspicious, the small feline observes the scene and wonders if this is all just a product of her own imagination now. A few days later, the scene changes to the facade of the large guild, indicating that the rest time has finally ended. Ranka then announces that today the blue-haired young man will finally meet the mysterious master of that organization. With that, the young man remembers the scheduled appointment, while reflecting on the recent outbreak of monsters that attacked the neighboring region. In that instant, the receptionist maintains a very serious look, showing that the matter to be discussed is of extreme importance. The hero wonders if the task will be tiring, but the woman confirms that there is a specific job request for him today. Sighing, the exile accepts his fate, as he understands that being an adventurer requires fulfilling his obligations correctly. Already inside the office, the guild leader states that he understands the situation while observing the young commoner with great attention. The organization's master greets the protagonist by name and invites him into his very luxurious meeting room. Maintaining his politeness, the gentleman points to the sofa and asks the boy to sit down to begin the conversation about the new mission. We then see Rikudo settled in while the chief begins to report the recent problems that are worrying the entire empire now. With his hands clasped, the veteran reveals that something very strange has happened in the last few days and requires a detailed investigation. The man details that a mysterious ruin appeared out of nowhere in the region and is causing a great stir among all the residents. Confused, the blue-haired young man asks about this ruin, wanting to understand what is so dangerous about that isolated place. The master explains that the beings there have human forms, but assures him that those creatures are not real people. At that moment, we see the silhouette of several living corpses walking, and the leader states that the bodies are moving on their own. Seriously, the hero hears about the undead and realizes that the situation is much darker than he initially imagined. The chief finishes by confirming that they sent elite agents, but they returned without making any real progress. Rikudo wonders if the enemy is an immortal being while mentally conversing with his vampire servant. He then looks at the cross pendant and concludes that the chance of facing an elite undead is very high now. The young man realizes that if the target cannot be defeated, the only option will be to seal it, as he did with the kitten Carmilla. With that, the guild master remembers that the young man recently solved a high-difficulty mission on his own. The gentleman states that he trusts the boy's potential and therefore makes the request for help directly to the blue-clad mage. With a smile, the hero understands that he needs to deal with the monsters in the ruin and accepts the challenge on the spot. Surprised by the quick response, the veteran stands up from the table and questions if the young man will really accept the task. The commoner says he will fulfill his duty, but makes it clear that he will demand a great reward for his effort. The leader guarantees that the payment will be made for sure, as the young man prepares to leave the enormous guild. We then see the adventurer's firm steps beginning his journey toward the place, surrounded by so much mystery. At that moment, the warrior arrives at the village and wonders what is really happening in that empty place. He observes the village from above, wanting to understand why the region is so quiet and without any residents. The mage discovers that a dungeon has appeared nearby and was planning to ask the people of the small village for information. With a very serious look, the protagonist analyzes the environment, sensing that something very dark is hidden nearby. The small cat Carmilla then feels a chill and telepathically warns that she can smell the scent of demise in the air. Suddenly, an attack hits the young man, but he uses his barrier technique, called Hibiki, to protect himself from the impact. A gigantic magic structure then appears, covering several houses and protecting the entire village at once. The colossal defense shines intensely as the blue-haired hero positions himself to face the imminent danger. The shield manipulator is then enveloped in a geometric dome, ready for any type of counter-attack. With his hand glowing, the warrior concentrates his mana to expand his power and completely dominate the battlefield. The hero notices there are two children, and the atmosphere becomes very tense as he observes the village's surroundings. The cat servant then screams desperately, asking her master not to stop what he is doing at that moment. The young man then explains that his auxiliary barrier, called Hibiki, is specifically for detecting any living beings nearby. With that, the warrior notices that there are only two human presences in the village and prepares for what will appear. At that moment, the exile focuses his gaze on the surroundings while trying to process the information about these survivors. Soon, a strange silhouette appears in the midst of the fog, revealing a danger that seems anything but human to the blue-clad young man. With that, the vampire warns that there are beings that are not alive but continue to wander through those frightening lands. In that instant, a bizarre shadow moves between the destroyed houses, showing that the enemy is very close now. Suddenly, the face of a rotten monster is revealed, and an atmosphere of terror takes over the gloomy and empty scene. Abruptly, a deafening roar echoes through the air as the creature demonstrates all its fury against the invader. Remaining calm, the protagonist observes the creature from above, without showing any sign of fear in the face of the real threat. The kitten Carmilla then goes into shock, recognizing that the target is actually a zombie wandering freely in that place. A woman transformed into a monster then rushes forward at high speed, trying to attack the young mage who remains motionless. Soon, another figure appears running down the dirt street, showing that the army of the undead is growing very quickly. Desperate, the servant tells the young man to flee and warns that a single bite can turn any human into one of those creatures. But the hero responds calmly that everything will probably be fine and is not fazed by his cat servant's screams. Annoyed, the small monster questions why he doesn't quickly take care of the beast before the danger worsens for them. With a piercing gaze, the barrier master states that he will not take that creature's life, leaving the cat confused. At that moment, the undead opens its mouth for the final strike, and the protagonist realizes he is about to be bitten. The zombie then grabs the young man's body with force, but the exile maintains his firm and focused expression on his secret plan. Small pieces of stone fall to the ground as a strange noise echoes throughout the village at that moment. We then see that the monster tried to bite the hero, but ended up chewing only air and stones from his invisible barrier. With a confident look, the blue-clad mage holds a glowing key, showing that his creation speed is absurd. At that moment, he explains that shield arts require a lot of focus, but for him, that's no problem at all today. He reinforces that creating something so resistant takes time, yet the young man seems to master the technique instantly. The young man then observes the creature and decides it's time to perform a very unexpected action in that empty place. Extending his arm, the master states that he will heal the target and tells the woman to wait just a few seconds for the result. With that, a soft light begins to emerge from the palm of his hand as small blue particles glow all around. Suddenly, an immense pillar of energy envelops the zombie, covering her entire body with a very intense and sacred glow. The cat servant realizes that the same healing magic used to save the adventurers attacked by the orcs the other day. But the hero reveals that the process is a bit different and maintains his calm smile as the glow intensifies. He states that although it looks like healing, he is using a much more advanced manipulation in his geometric barrier. Utterly in disbelief, The vampire yells that zombification is not a disease and therefore cannot be cured in a common way. The small servant then makes a face of pure rage and confusion, stating that what he does defies all the laws of the world. In that instant, the woman's hand begins to change color, returning to the texture of normal, healthy human skin. Confused, the woman observes her own arms and wonders what happened to her body and why she has changed so much. The kitten enters a state of total despair, screaming that she doesn't understand what her master just accomplished on that dirt street. Calmly, the blue-haired young man explains that he just made time go back to normal inside his magic dome now. But the servant complains, saying she doesn't understand anything, and asks if it's really possible to control time using only shields. The creature then lets out a frustrated yell, calling her owner annoying. As the village falls completely silent, the blue-haired young man walks toward a huge stone entrance hidden among the mountains in that location. With firm steps, the hero advances along the dark path, preparing to face the dangers of the dungeon. Suddenly, several undead begin to descend the stone stairs with slow and very frightening movements. At that moment, one of the monsters makes a bizarre sound, showing its rotten teeth to the commoner, who observes it without fear. But the mage just extends his hand and releases a bright light to envelop those hungry creatures right now. With the spell complete, the recovered residents run back to the village, feeling an immense relief in their hearts. The young man then asks what exactly happened and notices that the people's memories are very confused today. At the back of the dungeon, there is an immense and ancient door that seems to hide very dangerous secrets of that kingdom. One of the women states that she remembers reaching that entrance, but after that, everything became a big blur. The hero listens to the account attentively and realizes that the group's memories were erased in that strange place. Stroking his chin, the protagonist reflects on the mystery of the giant door while analyzing the current situation. With a focused gaze, the blue-clad warrior decides that he needs to investigate the interior of that structure right now. Walking through the empty corridor, the young man advances alone, showing that he does not fear the shadows of that royal construction. The cross pendant on the master's chest then begins to glow, emitting a soft and very comforting light. The sacred mark shines intensely as the young man channels his energy to protect himself from the evils of that ruin. But the cat servant appears, complaining that he cured all the zombies and even served as an escort for the civilians. With a furious look, the small monster states that her master is a lost cause and very difficult to deal with these days. The commoner then justifies that he couldn't leave that poor woman suffering and says the task was no trouble. Annoyed, the vampire shows her fangs and shouts that the hero makes impossible things seem like a silly game. She reinforces that teleportation is an advanced level magic and is indignant at the shield manipulator's ease. Calmly, the hero explains that the barrier is basically a manipulation of space and asks the servant to pay attention now. He then details that when creating a shield, the user defines two distinct places called the interior and exterior of the dome. Using this logic, the mage creates one point here and another at the final destination, then connects both in a quick magic tunnel. With that, the young man states that he can move between two locations in the blink of an eye, leaving the small cat very confused. Even after hearing everything, the vampire yells that she doesn't understand anything and questions who the people she mentioned earlier were. At that moment, the master asks who they are, but the small creature covers her own mouth, showing immense dread. Very seriously, the young man insists that she tell the truth, but the girl trembles with fear and states that she cannot say any names. Cornered, the servant reveals that if she utters those names, her life will be taken immediately by those powerful beings. Observing his companion's panic, the commoner reflects on who these dangerous and mysterious individuals might be. The blue-haired hero then wonders if she is talking about high-ranking vampires who rule the shadows. Suddenly, a purplish energy takes over the place as the undead continue to wander through the abandoned ruins. The monsters then let out frightening roars as the pair prepares to face whatever lies at the end of the corridor. With a piercing gaze, the master decides that he will find out the truth on his own as soon as he finishes this new mission. At that moment, we see the firm steps of the two adventurers echoing on the stone floor of that cold and silent dungeon. Soon, they reach the deepest floor of the construction and find the same colossal door that the civilians described before. Observing the structure, the warrior confirms that this is the exact location and keeps his guard up against any attack. Focusing his vision, the blue-clad young man gives the order to advance while the light from the pendant shines softly on his chest now. With a push, the travelers pass through the immense portal and find themselves in a luxurious hall illuminated by fire torches. A surprising sight is then revealed, showing several figures standing in a line before a very sumptuous royal seat. Sitting on the throne, we see a woman with glasses and an authoritarian look, accompanied by two servants standing by her side now. The mysterious blue-haired woman observes the visitors with a very calm and superior look from her royal throne. At that moment, the hero states that she must be one of the high-level vampires who rule those shadows. Surprised, the small servant asks how he figured that out, and the young man reveals it was just an accurate guess. With that, the villain in glasses stares intently at the boy as her eyes glow with a very intense blue energy. The commoner perceives that the woman's mana flow is much more overwhelming than Carmilla's own power. Strange noises begin to come from the surrounding undead, indicating that the situation is becoming dangerous. In that instant, the transformed residents approach slowly, carrying various real combat weapons. Terrified, the kitten questions what they are going to do, but the blue-clad master assures her that he doesn't care about any of that. We see the tips of spears and arrows ready for the attack as a war-like atmosphere takes over the large hall. The sound of clashing steel then echoes through the environment, showing that the enemy's blades are of a superior quality. Several warriors surround the pair from all sides, waiting for just one order to begin the total massacre. The blue-haired hero then asks if that woman is the one truly responsible for manipulating all the corpses. Suddenly, a blinding flash explodes in the middle of the room, pushing back the aggressors who were attempting a fatal charge. At that moment, a sword begins to vibrate with the magic pressure as the young man's counter-attack prepares. Screaming, the servant reveals that those are masters of ancient martial arts and wield very powerful divine relics. With a doubtful look, the boy just lets out a sound of disdain, leaving the small vampire completely indignant. But the protagonist reinforces that it doesn't matter what weapon they use, as his duty remains exactly the same. The master then activates his heavy impact technique as the barrier's light concentrates in his right hand. With a sharp movement, a shockwave throws all the opponents backward, clearing the path with great ease. Observing the faces of the monsters being repelled, the young man realizes that the real battle is just beginning today. Observing the field with her glowing eyes, the powerful vampire shows that she is not impressed in the slightest. The small kitten Carmilla then points her finger and complains that using those barriers is pure cheating in the middle of a fight. The young man then explains that if the enemies use overpowered weapons, he can also use his best protection to win. With that, the servant is left speechless and shows a face of total shock upon realizing her master's unshakable logic. At that moment, the blue-haired woman lets out a mocking smile, showing that she finds the conversation amusing. Sitting on her luxurious throne, the villain maintains a very imposing posture while observing the two invaders in the large hall. A tense atmosphere then takes over the place as the gazes of the hero and the powerful vampire cross in the air. Curious, she asks what a human came to do there, and the blue-clad mage replies that his only plan is to seal her now. Letting out a loud laugh, the woman shows her sharp teeth, thinking the boy's idea is the funniest of all. The sovereign then rises from the royal seat, stating that she will play a little with this brave insect today. In an authoritarian tone, the enemy reveals her title as Libra of the Scales as her power emanates throughout the location. At that moment, the golden object in her hands shines intensely, showing it to be a very high-level magic item. Suddenly, the villain opens her mouth and gives the order to attack. sending all her servants to advance with full force now. Shouting loudly, the woman orders them to take out the young man without mercy as a huge horde begins to move in the hall. With that, an army of undead emerges from the shadows, advancing like an unstoppable wave against the lone commoner. The monsters run with their eyes glowing white, ready to crush anyone who crosses their path today. In that instant, one of the zombies lets out a frightening roar, showing that those creatures have lost all humanity. Observing the dangerous crowd, the warrior positions himself next to his cat servant, who seems very terrified. The sea of enemies then swallows the view of the corridor as the final confrontation is about to explode in the underground. Keeping a smile on her face, the lady of the place observes the chaos from above, expecting to see the tragic end of the young blue-clad mage. The monsters advance relentlessly, crashing against the invisible wall while their eyes glow with a desire for demise. Even surrounded by the crowd, the blue-clad young man and his servant remain protected inside the glowing geometric structure. The small vampire then warns that these beings have no consciousness and will continue to attack until their lives end. The master then hears the warning, remaining calm, while the small monster becomes indignant at the young man's slowness. With an analytical gaze, the hero realizes that just staying on the defensive won't solve the problem of these dark ruins. At that moment, the horde of undead piles up more and more, creating a barrier of bodies and fury in the royal hall. Preparing his mana, the warrior takes a deep breath and decides it's time to put an end to all the commotion. Suddenly, a repulsive impact explodes from the magic dome, throwing all the zombies far away from him right now. We see the beasts flying through the air as the master uses his spatial force to clear the ground in just a second. But the creatures soon try to get up, showing an absurd resistance that greatly frightens the vampire cat servant. Realizing that the combat is at a stalemate, the commoner states that dealing with these pawns won't lead anywhere today. The mage then focuses his gaze on the villain sitting on the throne and warns that the next blow will be directed only at her body. The young man's arm then begins to glow with an intense energy as he prepares his fast-firing spell. With the cry of "Star Bullet," the hero releases several barrier projectiles that cut through the air like arrows of light. One of the shots hits its target with total precision, clearing a path through the army of corpses blocking the way. Soon, another swift shot takes down another enemy as the trail of bluish light illuminates the entire gloomy environment. Observing the attacks coming her way, the woman in glasses maintains her posture without showing any hint of fear. With a subtle hand gesture, the sovereign prepares her counter-attack as a smirk appears on her face. In that instant, the enemy strikes the air with force, releasing a crushing pressure that shakes the structures of the immense room. Startled, the hero's eyes widen as he feels that the vampire's power is much greater than he initially imagined. A beam of light hits the dungeon ceiling as the battle heats up on the deepest floor of the ancient ruins. At that moment, the villain's hand glows intensely, showing she has a trick up her sleeve for the counter-attack. With a shattering sound, the supposedly invincible barrier breaks, leaving the hero and his servant in total shock. The blue-haired young man then focuses his gaze, showing that he will not be shaken even with his defense destroyed. The two opponents then face each other up close as the magic pressure in the hall increases in a very frightening way. Suddenly, the warrior delivers a swift blow to the sovereign's head, trying to end the duel in an instant. Desperate, the kitten Carmilla yells, wanting to know if they finally defeated that dangerous threat. But a hand appears, touching the top of the enemy's head, revealing that the previous attack did not have the desired effect. Smiling, the vampire in glasses asks if the young man really thought he could take down an elite being with just one simple blow. With a cold gaze, she reinforces her immortality, making it clear that common injuries cannot take her life. The servant then panics, asking what they should do against a monster that simply won't go down. The master then takes a deep breath and decides it's time to resort to his most powerful secret technique. Today, with a calm gesture, the young man places his hand on his small ally's shoulder, trying to pass on some confidence to her. At that moment, the exile states that he will count on the vampire cat's help to carry out the next step of his plan. But he explains that he needs time to prepare the spell and tells the girl to hold off the enemies on her own now. Utterly indignant, the small monster shouts that it's impossible for her to face that army of zombies without help. With that, the master envelopes the servant's body with a bluish aura, guaranteeing that he will lend her his power to fight. Observing the scene from above, the villain lets out a mocking laugh, finding it very amusing to see her invader's desperation. The horde of undead then advances, while the kitten warns that she will flee as fast as her legs can carry her. The hero then makes a very serious face and threatens to extinguish his companion's flame of life if she tries to abandon her post today. Filled with rage, the small servant glares at her master and wonders if he is actually a heartless demon now. She then yells, asking if the young man is truly an evil being for forcing a defenseless girl to fight alone. But with no time to complain, the vampire runs toward the army of undead, letting out a cry of pure hatred today. Firmly holding her silver dagger, the kitten prepares to slice through all the enemies that cross her path now. With a quick movement, she adjusts the blade in her hand, focusing all her attention on the rapidly approaching horde. The small warrior then leaps into the middle of the crowd and begins to deliver deadly blows against the hungry zombies. At that moment, the weapon's cut slashes through one of the monster's chests, showing that her strength has increased significantly today. Advancing like a blur, the girl takes down several adversaries at once while clearing a path in the dark hall. With a furious look and eyes glowing red, the servant shows that she will not back down in the face of this real danger. Meanwhile, the blue-haired young man watches the fight from a distance and states that his ally should be able to hold her own now. The sovereign of the underground then places a hand on her head, indicating that she is finding the whole situation quite annoying. The two leaders then face each other with confident smiles, realizing that the real contest is about to begin today. In that instant, the golden scales shine intensely, revealing that an ancient and very dangerous power will now be used. Rising the sacred artifact, the woman in glasses announces that she will act first and tells the human to prepare for his fate. With a piercing gaze, the villain activates her special technique called Libra, and the environment grows heavy with so much mana. Suddenly, a clear blue flame appears in front of the hero, representing the pure soul of the blue-haired young mage. Soon, another mystical fire with darker tones floats in the air, symbolizing the life essence of the immortal vampire herself. The enemy then places the two souls on the plates of the golden scales as the final judgment begins in that empty place. Focused, the blue-haired sovereign observes the artifact's balance, wanting to discover which life holds the greater weight. With that, the magic instrument sways in the air, revealing the spiritual secret of each of the combatants present in the hall. The sovereign of the shadows announces that it is time to begin her sacred ritual of judgment. The blue-haired young man then listens intently to the explanation about the strength of the soul and the power of the mind. With a superior look, the enemy details that the stronger soul will be able to impose its will upon the weaker one. But the warrior understands that the game is about mental strength and confidently guarantees that victory is already his today. Suddenly, the scales tip drastically to the young man's side, leaving the vampire with her mouth wide open. In disbelief, the sovereign yells that she has lived for all eternity, and that her mind should be as strong as a god's. With a victorious smile and glowing eyes, the blue-clad young man shows that he was already expecting this result. The enemy then states that she is immortal nonetheless, but the young man warns that he just needed a little time. The blue-haired woman is left confused as the blue-clad mage prepares for his next great technique. With a cry of angel invocation, the warrior releases a colossal magic circle throughout the entire grand hall now. At that moment, a golden light appears, and the young man shouts the name Serial as white wings are revealed in the air. Soon, a divine and imposing figure with long blonde hair appears behind the young blue-haired mage. With a glowing halo above her head, The beautiful celestial creature maintains a serene and very calm expression. Maintaining his concentration, the protagonist prepares for the final blow with the help of his new ally of light. The young servant shouts and uses her blood manipulation, unleashing a red energy. With that, she summons sharp threads of blood that pierce several undead creatures. The glowing-eyed monsters stand no chance against the little vampire's lethal attack. With a wicked smile, the girl brags that she wouldn't waste a move like that on simple zombies. But a creature grabs her from behind while she's distracted by her own pride. The little cat girl is caught by surprise with a look of shock as the enemy holds her. She then struggles against the monster's grip, letting out a cry of frustration and pain. At that moment, the young vampire spins and cuts down the enemies that were surrounding her. Another one of the undead falls to the ground, showing that the girl's attack was effective. Panting, she asks if her master is ready, admitting that the zombies are weak. However, the immortal servant realizes that fighting so many at once is a problem. She faces the endless horde, knowing she won't be able to hold them off for long. Suddenly, an immense golden light fills the hall as angel wings appear. The cat girl looks up, completely astonished, not understanding what is happening. Even the powerful villainess is surprised and questions what that divine presence is. She then yells in disbelief, realizing that a real angel has been summoned there. The beautiful celestial creature floats majestically behind the barrier master. The enemy sovereign questions how a mere human could command a divine being. With a look of panic, the blue-haired woman screams that it's impossible. The protagonist stands still with the angel, and their presence overwhelms the entire place. He admits that he didn't want to have to resort to using this particular power. The warrior then stomps his foot, and a golden light explodes from the ground with great intensity. His fists clench tightly, glowing with an intense and divine energy. The young man then says a single word, beginning the final phase of his technique. He connects his power with the angels, and a beautiful golden sword materializes. The hero now holds the legendary weapon, ready to end the battle at once. The vampire sovereign screams in shock, not understanding what that weapon is. We see a close-up of the shining divine sword, full of detail in his hand. The protagonist announces the weapon's name, the dimensional sword, Eternal Edge. The villainess recognizes the name, realizing it is an ancient divine artifact. The villainess remembers that this legendary sword could cut the world itself. She thinks that this weapon should have been lost long ago and no longer exist. However, the hero explains that this is just an imitation of the original blade. He details that by fusing an angel's power with a barrier, he replicates the weapon. With the sword in hand, the protagonist starts walking toward his adversary. The young man advances through the hall with a firm stance, ready for the final combat. His focused gaze shows all the warrior's determination to end the fight. The vampire with glasses panics as she realizes she can't move her body. Her feet seem glued to the floor, and she doesn't understand the reason for the sudden paralysis. The commoner points out that a stronger soul can impose its will upon a weaker one. He then uses his mental strength to give a direct order, telling her not to move. The young man taunts her, saying it must be pathetic to have her own power used against her. Desperate, the blue-haired woman begs him to stay away, terrified. But the hero ignores her pleas and raises the divine sword for the final blow. His eyes glow intensely as he prepares to attack with everything he's got. With a swift motion, the warrior brings the blade down with overwhelming power. The slash hits the enemy, and several bright blue particles explode from the woman. Behind her, a huge dimensional rift opens from the sword's impact. The young man announces that he is sealing the vampire there, and she will never be able to escape. He watches with a serious look, ensuring that his mission is now complete. The villainess lets out a terrifying scream as she is pulled into the portal. Her hand is the last thing seen before she is completely consumed by the light. The rift closes, and the throne room returns to silence with the villainess defeated. The barrier master observes the peaceful area after the end of the intense battle. Just then, the angel who helped him begins to dissolve into particles of golden light. The divine light disappears completely, and calm returns to the dungeon hall. The little immortal servant is dumbfounded, unable to believe what she just witnessed. Amidst the undead, She wonders what on earth just happened there. The creatures are now standing aimlessly, as their master is no more. The kitten asks if that was really an angel, and her master confirms it was. The hero warns that if she says a word about this, he'll send her to the same rift. Terrified, the little cat girl screams and quickly agrees to her master's threat, but she complains that he acts this way toward someone who risked her own life for him. The vampire adds that not even getting a single thank you is a little cruel. At that, the barrier master just gives a small, discreet smile to his companion. He then thanks Carmilla and admits she was a great help in the battle. The servant is left speechless and a bit embarrassed by his sudden praise. Soon, she gets excited and says it was all thanks to her brilliant efforts. The young man cuts her off, telling her not to get too carried away with the situation. She then asks why he didn't use such a powerful technique from the very beginning. The young man explains that to use this power, he first needs to summon his fiancée, and he reveals that every time he does, the risk of her being seen by others increases. That's why he prefers not to use this ability unless it's absolutely necessary. A few days later, we see the entrance to the dungeon where it all happened again. A man with gray hair approaches the large stone door of the ruin. He carries a katana at his waist and appears to be a very experienced warrior. The newcomer notices that the dungeon door has been completely destroyed. He then enters the place and finds a scene of total destruction and silence. The throne room is filled with the bodies of the undead scattered all over the floor. Swordsman stops and wonders what on earth could have happened in that place. Just then, another man appears and informs him that the vampire they were hunting has vanished. He reports that the enemy's presence completely disappears from that point on. The warrior in the white coat understands that their target didn't just flee from there. He concludes that someone must have certainly sealed the powerful vampire somehow. His companion is shocked and questions if they really sealed a high-level being. The man in the coat asks if there's any chance he escaped with teleportation, but his partner denies it, saying that type of being is too proud for that. He emphasizes that the word retreat doesn't even exist in their vocabulary. The swordsman then states that sealing a high-ranking entity is impossible. Finally, he agrees and deduces that it was probably the work of one of their own. The man in the white coat becomes thoughtful as he analyzes the dungeon's situation. Just then, a hand on the ground begins to move, showing that the danger isn't over yet. The two warriors then see the undead rising and preparing to attack. A horde of zombies with red, hungry eyes surrounds the two men in the hall. The creatures rise slowly, showing that the danger is returning in full force. The zombies scream and charge forward, while one of the swordsmen calmly watches everything. The glowing-eyed creatures run with an uncontrollable and frightening fury. But in an instant, all the monsters begin to be frozen by an ice magic. The man in the white coat sheathes his sword as the enemies shatter into pieces. We then see all the zombies trapped in large ice crystals, completely immobile. The gray-haired swordsman stares at the scene with a cold and distant expression. He says that at least now they can rest in peace inside the eternal ice. His partner calls him soft, but the warrior in the coat tells him to shut his mouth. At that moment, the swordsman notices a faint trace of remnant magic in the air. He states that he will remember that power signature he felt in the hall, and he vows that if he finds the owner of this magic, he will recognize them immediately. His partner wonders who used such a monstrous technique to seal a vampire. The scene cuts to our protagonist smiling in a very confident and calm way. Back in the city, we see the facade of the Adventurers Guild building. The hero informs the guild master that they no longer need to worry. The older man thanks him greatly, saying they did well to trust him. The blue-haired young man smiles as he receives the reward for the completed mission. He is shocked to see the huge amount of money bags he received. With his eyes shining, the commoner thanks them immensely for the generous reward. The young man holds up a wad of bills, celebrating the great luck he had today. Walking down the street, he says that now they won't have to worry about expenses for a while. The little black cat beside him seems to have a question and begins to ask him. She asks why he didn't tell them about the high-ranking vampire in the dungeon. The young man explains that if he had, he would have had to reveal the secret about his fiancée. The cat understands and comments that a battle like that was pretty easy for him. The servant asks what kind of opponent would give her master a real fight. He thinks that someone immune to his barriers and seals would be quite a challenge. The kitten then changes the subject and wants to know if his fiancé remembers anything. The exile explains that she doesn't, as she is basically asleep during the summoning. At that moment, the couple finally arrives back at the inn where they are staying. His beloved appears with a radiant smile and welcomes the young warrior. The blonde girl greets him at the door, saying he came back from work early. The blue-haired young man smiles at her and then looks at his immortal servant. The little cat makes a disdainful face, as if she doesn't care about the scene, but his fiancé picks her up with great affection and welcomes the little cat. The servant seems a bit uncomfortable, but accepts the blonde's tight hug. Seeing this, the protagonist gets a look of pure jealousy and irritation at the scene. He thinks he should have left her tied to the cross, while his fiancé asks about work. With a smile, the mage says he finished the mission perfectly and without any problems. The young man suggests they spend a little since the payment was very generous, but his beloved refuses right away, playfully placing a hand on his face. She says they need to save for the future, while posing with the little cat. The barrier master sighs and agrees that his travel partner is right. He watches her as she looks out the window of their room at the small inn. Then the blonde winks at him and suggests they can spend just a little bit today. The blue-haired young man looks at her with a gentle and affectionate smile. He agrees with her idea, and the two get ready to go out and have fun. With that, we see the happy couple leaving the inn for a special day in the city. The pair walks together through the busy streets of the prosperous Empire City. They stop at a local market, where the girl looks at some fresh tomatoes. Holding hands, the exile thinks that as long as his beloved is an angel, dangers will come. He reflects that ill-intentioned people will surely come after them in the future. The mage fears that she could be taken from him, as he imagines a hearty dinner. This scene shows the couple enjoying a pleasant meal at a restaurant, but the hero promises with a smile that he will never let that happen, no matter the cost. The story continues with the protagonist and his friends traveling in a wagon on a beautiful, sunny day. He explains that they decided to move to another city to start a new life. The reason for the move is that the young man didn't want to keep his beloved in one place for too long. But the little cat notices a man in a cloak who seems a bit suspicious among the travelers. She then wonders if they are really safe with such a strange guy around. However, the barrier master says it should be fine and tells her not to worry. He adds that, at least for now, there is no imminent danger on the road. The cat realizes that her master is just waiting to see how the stranger will react. With a suspicious look, the immortal servant continues to watch the mysterious man. Time passes, and the journey continues peacefully under the blue, cloudless sky. The blonde snuggles up to her beloved's shoulder, saying how warm and pleasant the day is. The blue-haired young man gives a warm smile, seeing his companion's happiness. Suddenly, the mage's expression changes completely, and his eyes widen in surprise. The kitten asks what's wrong and senses the presence of approaching monsters. The exile is surprised that she can also sense the threat of two orcs in the forest. The commoner explains that he has spread a thin barrier around them to detect enemies. The cat is impressed and realizes that not even a surprise attack would work on him. The young man then prepares to attack, using his offensive barrier transformation. His hand glows intensely as he invokes his star projectile technique. Several geometric light projectiles form around the wagon, ready to be fired. With that, the energy shots are fired at high speed in all directions. The orcs in the forest are hit head-on by the projectiles and end up on the ground. The little cat is impressed by the precision and beauty of her master's attack. She comments that with this detection barrier, he is practically invincible in combat. However, the young man says he has a weakness, and the curious servant asks what it is. He explains that with monsters, he can attack as soon as they enter his barrier's range. But with humans, he can't do that, and has to wait to know their intentions. Just then, a gruff voice yells for them to stay put, if they don't want to get hurt. A group of bandits appears on the road, blocking their wagon's path. The young man then points to the bandits and says he only knows their intention now. A bandit yells for the travelers to hand over everything of value they have. One of the criminals grabs the coachman by the collar. With a threatening expression, the thieves surround the wagon, intimidating all the passengers with their weapons. A bald brute promises he will spare their lives if they cooperate. With wicked smiles, the two bandits show they aren't messing around. The barrier master watches the scene with a cold and very serious look. At that moment, the young man raises his hand, and a blue light begins to shine. His beloved watches him with a worried expression about the dangerous situation. The protagonist is sitting next to the hooded man he found suspicious. We see the mysterious man's face, who remains calm with his eyes closed. The exile and his fiancée watch the bandits while the cat thinks about them. The immortal servant says that her master could easily take care of all of them. With a worried look, the young man admits that's exactly the problem. The kitten asks what the problem is, since these guys are nothing to him. Confused, the little creature doesn't understand her powerful master's hesitation. The young man reveals that his barriers weren't made for humans, and he can't control himself. He adds that he can't let his beloved see such a heavy scene. The servant gets serious and understands her master's concern about the situation. She then comments that the exile's barrier magic is too strong for this. The immortal creature concludes that against humans, his power would be overkill. The young man says that besides that, there is another reason, and the cat wants to know what it is. He reveals that the main reason is the weirdo with the strange aura nearby. We see the hooded man again, who continues to sit with his eyes closed. The servant asks what's so strange about that mysterious man's aura. One of the thieves complains, looking at some coins in his hand and finding it too little. In the back of the wagon, a mother and her daughter hug each other, terrified of the bandits. Then, one of the brutes grabs the little girl's arm with a malicious look. The bandit says he's going to take the girl with him, leaving the mother desperate. The woman begs him not to do it and to let her daughter go immediately. She throws herself on the ground and grabs the thief's leg, pleading for him to spare her daughter. The brute gets annoyed with the woman and clicks his tongue with a look of contempt. With a violent kick, he shoves her away, yelling for her to let go of him immediately. The little girl cries in fear and screams for her mother upon seeing her get hurt. Another bandit says not to treat her so violently, as she is a beautiful woman. The mother on the ground trembles with fear at the criminal's scornful looks. Then the blonde man approaches and holds her chin with a malicious smile on his face. With a disgusting look, he suggests he could make another child with her to replace the girl. The woman is completely horrified by the thief's sick proposal. The hero's fiancée watches everything with a dark expression of pure, contained rage. She clenches her fists tightly, unable to bear seeing the bandits' cruelty any longer. Just then, the blonde-haired young woman holds her beloved's arm, getting his attention. The barrier master just looks at her with a calm and confident smile. The criminals continue with their actions, not caring about the other passengers. Suddenly, two voices in perfect sync order the bandit to take his hands off her. The protagonist and the hooded man stand up and shout together at the thieves.